Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for yet another edition of the Resurrected Word radio show. Here we believe that man does not live on bread alone, nor does he live on just part of God's Word. In all truth, we live on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Therefore, it is the focus of this show to discuss many sacred books that proclaim Jesus Christ, writings that were formerly hidden and or suppressed from you, our brethren. I am InHISWord2 as your host. My special guest for this July 2014, actually, it's July 2014, it's July 12th, episode is Brother Robert Farrell, who is also known here on YouTube as Apocryphile1970. And we have the second part of the secret book of James to share with you today. Hello, Robert. How are you doing today?
Doing just great. How you doing?
I'm doing good, too. And I would recommend anyone interested in this book to go get yourself a copy at www.scriptural-truth.com and download that free PDF that Robert has provided for everyone and read it for yourself. Again, I want to just give a little mention for Robert has started a huge project, and this is in regards to the super gospel. For those of you who have heard his narration, right now, for the first time ever, Robert is inviting everyone to get involved in making some video slideshows to bring the text to life. And you can see some examples of completed videos for this project in the Animated Gospel playlist on his channel. And those of you who are interested in getting involved may contact Robert with any concerns or questions. And I will also help anywhere as needed. In fact, I just posted one up today called The Overthrow of Hades. And I highly recommend that everyone just check it out. It's a really good video. I had a lot of fun making it. It's not an evil image type video. I don't really care too much with evil images, so I had to make up my own.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what, Carol, that was a really great video. I think everybody should check it out. Just to kind of see, it's obvious that you had fun making it, and that just underscores the fact that, when you really kind of get into these stories, they can be fun, and you can really have a lot of enjoyment, I think, and pleasure in sort of, doing these things. And I invite anybody to make videos of that or really anything else that I produce or whatever. If you forward me a copy, I'll upload it to my channel as well or whatever. But all of my stuff is out there kind of like as raw materials for people to use. And the Super Gospel by itself, that one book is subdivided into over 300 sections, and so it is a big project. It would be impossible for any one or two people to do. And so realistically,
right.
realistically though, if there are thousands of people, I think, who subscribe to this channel, if people out there who had the ability even to make a simple slideshow with images, public domain images, I provided a few links, and Carol here has given me a few links to share with you where you can find a lot of these public domain images. But, with the idea that imagine if you were able to pull up any one of those 300 plus sections and kind of get a visual on it, as well as an audio. You could actually bring this whole thing to life. There's a lot of ancient art that's actually available, like Luxy AAA, who's done a few of these videos also. He was able to find all kinds of images about Anna and Joachim and stuff, because these are actually characters that have been painted and dealt with and stuff. They belong to Christian history.
Right.
They are a part of our Christian heritage. and all of that art and everything is also part of our Christian heritage. And a lot of that has just sort of disappeared, and it's just one of those things that people don't talk about it, people don't pass them on, and these legends kind of die. But there was a time in earlier Christianity when the entire Christian landscape was vastly different from the way it is presented to us today. And so when you look at this stuff, you get a sense of how genuinely ancient this stuff actually is, and how genuinely a part of Christian tradition it once was. It gives you that sense. And so to do this is, in a sense, to sort of bring some of that older Christianity, to life, and to be able to put a little bit of your own personality or your own slant on things or whatever as you're doing it, to present it in a way that you can express yourself while at the same time helping others to get a sense of this ancient lost tradition. Well, I say lost, I mean most of it was suppressed, most of it was pushed aside as the not necessary, or less than inspired or whatever, but that was by people who
And
really have reduced.
for those who don't know, Anna and Joachim were Mary's parents. And that's the things that you learn when you read these older texts.
Yeah, there's a whole, but the underlying thing here about that gospel is that there's a whole kind of story from beginning to end, and I think that people will see it once they sort of they sort of get kind of the general overall picture of ancient and early Christianity, that this is a useful source that I hope will be completed sometime in the near future. I think that if everybody just did 1 or 2 sections and contributed, this could be done in a very short amount of time. But even if it doesn't happen overnight, just the fact that it's kind of an open invitation to people to contribute. So, if you want to do it,
encourage everyone to get involved and just have fun with it, do the best you can, and that's all that our God expects from us, to make a commitment, apply ourselves, do the best we can, and we're here for you, Robert and I, and I'm sure some other people out there will be willing to help you, find images, or work with different programs if we know them, to help you get an idea of how to do this.
Well, I really like the one that you just now did, Carol. Everybody should check that out. The overthrow of Hades. That was just too awesome. But
I've never done bobblehead figures before.
I got a kick out of it. I really did. So yeah, that's the other thing too. I mean, if you do it all yourself, you're sort of like doing everything your way. When you open it up to everybody else, it's like, wow, I never would have thought of that, or oh wow, I didn't have that skill. So you get kind of a pleasant surprise, with other people when they put their creativity in. It's really exciting, to see this happen. So
I like a lot of those that Lexi did. It
yeah,
just really brought it. Like, wow, I didn't realize how much more attention I pay to the storyline when there's an image given to me to also follow along.
Yeah, one of the things he's really good at is expressing kind of the emotional angle, or he's able to bring that out. And he doesn't have to use a great number of images. Like, you can do a whole lot with a little bit if you want to. And so watching his videos, great example of that. So again, it doesn't have to be a huge effort or a huge endeavor, just something where you're able to bring a little bit of yourself to it, a little bit of how you see it to it, so that other people can see it from kind of your point of view. And there's just a whole world of people out there, and so there's a whole world of potential. This could go in all kinds of directions. And so I look forward to getting these things. It's always a pleasant surprise when Carol or Luxie or somebody else sends me something and says, "Look, this is something for you to publish," and it's like, wow, and you're just so amazed by it, And so,
Right.
yeah, I encourage people to participate, and besides all of that, it's a good thing for people to do works and to contribute to the good of all. I think that this is the kind of thing that God finds pleasing in people,
Oh,
and it's
yes.
something that He would encourage us to help one another and to share with one another and to contribute. And the payoff is you may contribute one or two or three, and somebody else may contribute one or two or three, and in the end we have hundreds. And
Right.
it's
And not
it's
only that,
coming from everybody, and
but
it's
it
a
gives us
show of
it.
solidarity.
That's that's where I was going with it. It shows a kind of a camaraderie, and it's a way to bring us all together. I
Right,
really
because
see that.
this whole movement, the idea is that it's not coming from the top down. It's not an institution.
No.
So many movements throughout history, be they religious or otherwise, they start out with people kind of participating and everybody kind of doing a little here, a little there, and it's grassroots and
Right.
it's organic. And that's
Mhm.
kind of what this should be, in my opinion. It should be grassroots and it should be organic, mainly because other people will look at it and say, "Hey, this isn't a corporate thing. This isn't a top-down thing. This
Oh my
isn't
goodness, they're
coming
not
from."
charging for it. They're not
Oh
publishing
yeah,
CDs
you know what
and
I'm
charging
saying?
for it.
Just
They're giving it out for the good of all. Oh my
that's
goodness,
right.
this is
That,
unheard of.
yeah, it kind of
Yeah.
is actually. And Christians, especially, I don't understand why everything they do they got to copyright it and put it into the whole world economy and stuff. Christians should be at least giving some of their stuff away to other people to use freely, and
Exactly.
that's
Like
exactly what.
Christian music, it's you can't get any Christian music. They'll flag your video in a heartbeat if you use, say, some of these Christian artists out there, unless you know them personally and get their permission, and then you still may get flagged, but by YouTube. But
True.
if there's a dollar sign on it anywhere, they're going to try to flag you. So I don't know.
I I hear you, but that's the idea, is that it's just us.
It's
It's
yeah,
just people, heart to heart, soul to soul, mind to mind, hand to hand, and that kind of thing. And it's
right,
just a kind of a loose association of people who kind of believe a certain thing and want to contribute, something to
right.
the puzzle. And so, with that in mind, having
Yes.
said that, I really appreciate the videos that you've produced before. I don't. This doesn't. The one you produced today is really great. It doesn't overshadow the one you did before about the cross of
John.
light, which was
Mhm.
also very good. So you know, you're what you're doing,
I'm
Carol, is
stretching
phenomenal.
myself.
But that's good. That's good for
I'm
you, and it's
stretching
good for
myself.
everyone
I'm
else.
I'm
The,
doing
the, if 1,000 people watch your videos, or if 10,000 people watch your videos, then your efforts are not just for yourself; they're multiplied thousands of times.
right.
And so every little thing that you do has a much broader effect. And so it really is. You're doing much more than you think you're doing. And I think in the end, when it all comes down to it, when our works and our whatever are read out, when that time comes about, you're going to see so much value added. It's going to be like, what you did affected so many other people. And
Right.
so it's a way, I think, for all of us to kind of get together and actually be like Christians are supposed to be. Nobody's claiming anything for themselves. Nobody's, you know, trying to be the big boss or whatever. Everybody's kind of, it's very egalitarian, in
Right.
some sense. And so we actually, and that's kind of what we're striving for, is just a brotherhood, not like a, hierarchy.
Not a hierarchy at
I
all.
think that's
We're all
I
in
think that's inimical to
we're all in the
spirituality for the
same
most part. Yeah.
we're all in the same boat, and Jesus is our captain. Jesus Christ is our captain, and we're all in the same boat, and we all need to row together.
So, but thank you again for all of that. So we need to
Oh,
kind of
my
steer the
pleasure.
boat then back in the direction of secret James here.
Yeah, yeah.
well,
For those waiting for us to talk about the secret book of James, here it comes.
well,
All
I'll tell you
righty.
what. Well, I think that the previous discussion that we had, I think everybody really who's interested in what we're talking about here it would be very helpful to go back and listen to part one before you listen to part two, is there's a lot of things that you probably wouldn't catch in part two, although I'm kind of bad about explaining things ad nauseum, no matter how many times I go over it. You might still miss a few things, so you might want to go back and revisit
Part one.
the part one of it. But kind of the long and the short of it is that here you have James, who is symbolic of the Jews, and Peter, who is representative, if you will, of the Christians, being visited by Jesus after his ascension, as they are sitting together and recounting their stories to one another. And so in the process of doing this, as they are writing, as they are recalling, Jesus shows up and says, I need to take James aside, who symbolizes the Jews, and Peter aside, who symbolizes the Christians, and I need to fill them spiritually. And
Right.
so in the process of trying to show them some of the errors of their way, some of the errors of their thinking, and basically at that point, he starts getting resistance, a little bit of resistance from Peter, a little bit of resistance from James. Not that they're opposed to Jesus. It's more like they're confused, or they're kind of kind
Reluctant.
of not, they're a little reluctant to face the hardships and some of the things that
Right.
he's demanding of them. And it's understandable. I mean, after all, James and Peter are human. Christians and
Right.
Jews are human. It's understandable. But from the point of view of Jesus, who has given it all and laid it on the line and sacrificed for us and for them, you know, there is room for improvement. He wants them to act on their own without being prodded. He wants
Right.
them to give of their own without thought to what they might lose in the
He wants
process. He wants them to,
he wants them to come without being bidden, you
well, but
know?
then, but see, that's part of being filled spiritually.
Right, right, because you just
To
want
understand
yeah.
that the flesh is opposed to the spirit, to then indulge in the flesh, or even to spare the flesh, as he puts it, um, is detrimental to spirit. In that spiritual exercise involves a little bit of suffering in the flesh. And in order for James and Peter, the Christians and the Jews, in other words, to develop, they need to get rid of their old ideas, which is reason, let's say, or logic, which he says is of the soul
Mhm.
rather than of the spirit, and to give um, of themselves, I guess, to embrace their death and their suffering and all of this other that awaits them. That it's kind of their obligation, if you will, or it's a necessary step in the process towards that. But having said that, he arrives kind of at the point where he's chastising them for their reluctance, for their slowness um, to really be on board 100% with what he's asking them to do. And so he chastises them a little bit about their the fact that they've gone a little bit astray and that they've lost sight of what is important. And so basically, where we left off, he's asking them to obey him. He says, observe that I have descended, and that I have spoken, and I have troubled myself, and I have received my crown when I saved you. For I have descended to dwell with you, in order that you may also dwell with me. And when I found that your houses had no ceilings over them, I dwelt in houses which would be able to receive me when I descended. Um, so he's talking about other people because their houses had no ceiling. So he's talking about a future generation of people who would be able to receive him when he descended, because Peter's already full of reason, as I stated in a previous episode, and it says earlier in the letter here, that he's full of reason, so he's thinking to himself, well, the way I think is sufficient. And Jesus is telling him, no, you have to be voided of your human reasoning and your soulish reasoning, and you need to be filled with spiritual reasoning. That is to say, to believe what I say, to pay attention to the word, to pay attention and to understand, and then you will be devoided of your human reasoning, and that will be replaced by spiritual life or spiritual um, experience or spiritual fullness.
Mhm.
And that comes through obedience and through paying attention to the word. He goes on, he says, therefore obey me, my brothers, understand what the great light is. Well, again, what is the great light as opposed to the lesser light? The lesser light would be reason, the reasoning of the flesh. Um, it even says this in the Gospel of Philip, by the way. He talks about ekmoth and ekmoth, which is there's the lesser light and there is the greater light. The greater light being the spiritual light,
I
understanding
see.
the heavenly aspect of things as opposed to the earthly aspect of things. And you know, to understand things in a worldly way is the lesser light. To understand, like for example, like I mentioned in the previous episode, where Jude, for example, views a book like the Book of Enoch, which was rejected by the scribes and the Pharisees, rejected by the Christians. He regards it as ancient. He calls him the seventh from Adam. So that's Jude's opinion. That's Jude's assessment of the situation. He calls him a prophet. He said he prophesied of these people, these men, or actually the word is to these men. He prophesied to these men, so these men are guilty of not listening to him. But the idea is that okay, following that logic, you can be in agreement with Jude. And being in agreement with Jude, it makes sense now that Peter is taking Jude and defending Jude by writing his second letter around Jude, and almost all of Jude is found in chapter 2 of 2nd Peter, and that explains why. But reason, which is the lesser light, the
Mhm.
lesser wisdom,
Right.
because that would be the greater light. The greater light then leads to a whole other way of thinking, is what I'm
It
saying.
does.
If you
It does.
believe Jude and you believe what he is saying and you take his side,
Mhm.
then you see Second Peter and Jude as belonging together, like as if Jude should follow Second Peter. Or actually, if you look at my video, the 28th book of the New Testament, you actually can
Right.
combine those two letters, that they actually belong together. Like here in Secret James, for example, you see all the apostles and everybody getting together, and they're talking to each other. They're participating in the writing down of these things.
Exactly. They're all together writing.
So, but they're all together.
Mhm.
So it's not that difficult to imagine Peter and Jude writing this letter together, sitting down and making a letter that fits together, which is what
Right.
I demonstrate. Because if you go and you read that, again, it's the 28th book of the New Testament. You'll find it in my videos.
Right.
You'll find that I didn't add anything at all to it. There
You
was
just put
a
the
couple of little ands I think that I put in there, like
where they were
like
where
Peter
they were
and Jude.
synchronous and put them
But there,
together.
but it reads as one letter. So
Yes.
here is something that is possible to see it as one letter if you think according to the great light or the greater wisdom. And
Right.
so then the greater wisdom puts things together. The lesser wisdom tears things apart. And it goes completely the other way. And that's what reason does to your thinking processes. It actually
Kind
blocks
of
your
dulls
ability. Well, it blocks your
your
ability to see what is there, and is therefore darkness,
and blinding. It's a blind.
blindness,
Yes, it's
and
a blinding.
deafness. And
Mhm.
Jesus came to heal us of our spiritual blindness and our
Right.
spiritual deafness. He came to do this, and by what means? By the greater light,
Mhm.
like the light that dawns in the underworld, if you will. you know,
Like the
we are
video.
metaphorically, but we are metaphorically, in a way, the underworld. The prophets are held in darkness. The prophets themselves are bound in chains, just like it is in Hades. You know,
Right.
and as a result, when the light breaks forth, that great light, if you understand what that great light is, and it is through understanding and it is through obedience. We are told to believe the prophets. That is an act of obedience. To
Yes.
disbelieve the prophets is an act of disobedience.
Right.
And
To
so
cast them aside. To cast them aside is to be like, no, I'm not doing that. It's like you said, disobedience.
But you can believe me or not, right? But logically, I can show you how belief in Jude's statement leads to a different understanding of, say, Second Peter. And
Right.
and and looking at Second Peter and Jude as if they were one letter, and then looking at the reality that the church and tradition, because they took a view that was at variance with Jude's, that was in contradiction with Jude. Jude may say this, but we know that because they're full of reason,
Right.
right? Not spirit. Spirit doesn't tell God that he's wrong,
Right.
okay? Reason might. Human reason might disagree with God, but the spirit will never will disagree with God. So
Right.
the problem is people might think this is a very small thing. And it may be designed to seem like a small thing. But when
Mhm.
Jesus talks about the Old Testament and the law, he says not a jot, not a tittle, right? Anybody who
Right.
breaks the least of these commands, right,
Right.
and teaches others to do so, it would be better for them to have a millstone hung around their neck and to be cast into the sea, all
Right.
right? So even if you're the most cynical person and you say that's the least important book, the least important statement, it still counts. Because even if you broke that least little command, right? You're still
Mhm.
guilty. And that's the point. The point is you have to take what is there and affirm it and believe it. And if you
Right.
don't affirm it and you don't believe it, then you're not a believer. What you are is a disbeliever
Mhm.
who is fooling themselves and fooling others in the process. So you become guilty of damage to your own soul and contributing to your own blindness and the damaging of other people's souls and contributing to their blindness in the process. And so you go ahead and you deceive yourself and you deceive others without really even realizing what you're doing because you allow for that little bit of doubt, for that little bit of question, because you're willing to let these little things that you regard as minor go away. If, however, you take the other tack, you follow the great light, you follow the great wisdom, you start pursuing it in another way of thinking, in another spiritual way, then you become full of other ideas. It becomes a whole other world that opens up to you to understand the relationship between Jude and Second Peter, for example, in a different way. Then you start thinking, well, when Second Peter says, look, this is the teaching that we got, that us the apostles received from our Lord, right?
Right.
So right here is the one book in the New Testament really that draws the line between what the Lord said and what the apostles themselves got from the Lord, right? And then he draws a line to Paul. He says, even as our beloved brother Paul also wrote to you in the um, with the wisdom God gave him,
Right.
right? He writes in all of his letters about these things. Okay,
Mhm.
so if you recognize that what Peter is writing about is the validity of Jude and defense of his usage of non canonical sources like Enoch, like the Assumption of Moses, if those are the things that he's talking about, if this is the faith that we are actively supposed to fight for, as Jude puts it, but we don't, we actively fight against them, right?
Mhm.
They actively fought against the book of Enoch. They actively fought against the Assumption of Moses rather than for it. So that's complete disobedience to God's word.
Well, Tertullian now, he actually argued for the Book of Enoch. Um,
Well, it
it's
was
little
divided.
known. It's
But what I'm
little
saying is
known.
ultimately the church and human reasoning won out.
Oh
This is
yeah.
why Peter, in the context of the secret book of James here, is saying that he is full,
Right.
right?
He
And
already
does not need to
knows,
be
already has
filled.
what he needs.
But that is tantamount to saying that the church, because it knows, quote unquote, everything already, because it's got it
Right.
all figured out, okay,
Right.
it doesn't need input from people like you or me or Jude or anybody else.
Right. Right.
Doesn't need that input. And you see that same resistance coming from Peter here,
Right.
or a reluctance to stick your neck out on the part of James, where he says, allow us not to be tempted by the wicked devil. So he just
Right.
wants a pass. And
Right.
Jesus isn't going to give him one, because that's not how it works. You don't get virtue for nothing. You
Right.
don't get merit for nothing. And he mentions merit. Where is your merit if I just give it to you for nothing?
Right.
Right? unless you're actually struggling for it, you don't have genuine merit. It's just a, it's just a free ride, and that just doesn't happen in the world of virtue. It doesn't even
Right.
make logical sense. So he's basically, by through all of this stuff and up to this point, he's kind of laid the groundwork for why it is that Peter and James, the Christians and the Jews, are not really fit to bring the kingdom about, and how that misunderstanding, that disobedience, that reluctance to give up their own ideas so that they can be filled with the Spirit, their reluctance to accept the fact that they are going to be tempted and tried by the devil rather than just given a free pass or whatever. How that means, or that signifies to us in the future who read this, kind of what the problem was early on, and lets us know in retrospect why it was that he had to call upon a third people.
Well, it's
And
kind of like they were putting their feet in the water, but they didn't jump all the way in.
well,
You
I
know.
think, yeah, but what I think is happening with that is it is that, but at that point he's come to give them instruction. He's
Right.
taken
Yes.
those two apart in order to give them a
A
heads
heads
up,
up. Right. A
yeah,
heads up.
about
Like, look,
where the
this is
message is now going to go.
right. Mhm.
Okay, he's told them that, look, you have to embrace my cross and my death. Okay, Jesus, being the Logos, was
Right.
crucified, unjustly, imprisoned unjustly, and etc., like we talked about last time.
Mhm.
Okay, and he's saying, look, even as I, the Logos, was mistreated and hung up and buried under earthly terminology or whatever, under the earth for 3 days, and 3 nights or whatever. This is what you are to imitate. Even as I gave up myself, you, James, you, Peter, now you have to give up yourselves. You need to embrace the um, the same kind of death in imitation of my death. You have to embrace the same death. In other words, the mystery of the church is going to die. The mystery of Judaism is going to die.
Right.
And they need to face it. They need to understand that Judaism is going to relapse back into its former state, that Christianity is going to follow the same example as Judaism. They are going
Right.
to relapse again into illness. They're going to
Into
relapse again
religion.
into
Right.
religion.
Mhm.
So he's saying, look, because this is going to happen, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, okay? But in a sense, the overall message up to this point is, because this is going to happen, all right, and because you guys are going to follow after my example as the Logos, as the death of the Logos or whatever, that that this necessitates a third generation. And so that's what this kind of the second half of the letter kind of focuses on, after he kind of lays into him a little bit more, which he kind of does. He tells him that the father does not need a son, but it is the son who needs the father, and it's to him that he is going, for the father or son is not in need of you. Meaning, he doesn't need backslidden people. He doesn't need the church as it is. He doesn't need Judaism as it's going to be. He needs people who will hear his word and pay attention to it, who will hear knowledge and understand knowledge, who will
He wants
love
them
life.
totally. He wants them totally invested.
Well, he wants them to yeah,
Totally.
exactly, to be all in.
Right. Totally
And that's what you
invested.
got to be, right?
Right.
Okay, so then he continues. He says, pay attention to the word, understand knowledge, love life, and no one will persecute you, nor will anyone oppress you other than you yourselves. And why is that? Well, because what they are is conflicted.
Mhm.
What they are is a little bit hypocritical. And he explains again earlier in the letter that it is the evil thought that leads to hypocrisy. It is the idea that they want to be man pleasers
Mhm.
while at the same time being in good standing with God. And then
Mhm.
James in his canonical letter says you cannot do that. You cannot be friends with the world and friends with God. Okay?
Right.
So apparently, but in any case, the idea here, though, is that if you pay attention to the word, for example, like I just mentioned, if Jude says he's the seventh from Adam, then pay attention to that,
Right.
right? If you don't, where does that lead you? It leads you to an uncomfortable situation where you have to treat the two as if they're not related. And in the
Mhm.
canon, there's a little deception there because they've taken that book and moved it away out of its context so that you would not look at those two together. So
Right.
even to this day, there's traces of this hypocrisy that have made its way down through tradition. That's one that's basically structural in nature. We'll just take the two and keep them far enough apart to where people, aren't reading them together. And
Right.
just bury it, and by the time they get to Jude, why, there's Revelation, which is much more exciting. Let's just skip past this, or
Right.
let's
And
just
it's only
blow through it,
basically
and
one
so
page, it's not really even a book. So, a lot of people just skip right over Jude.
in its
Sure.
position almost makes it de facto the least important book in the Bible.
Exactly. It really
And
does.
that's what people imagine it to be. And so they're
Right.
not paying attention to the word, and therefore they're not understanding knowledge.
And they're missing out.
And they're missing out on the life,
Right.
right?
They're really
And
missing out because I
okay,
tell you what,
but
you
who is persecuting them? They themselves are persecuting themselves. Like in the book of Revelation, where you see this, the letters to the churches and everything, right? He's like,
Mhm.
you're doing good, but you got
Yeah.
those among you who are like this or that, right?
Right.
And the idea is that you shouldn't tolerate that. You've got
Right.
those, the people of Jezebel or whatever, they're saying, or whatever, and you got those among you, the Nicolaitans or whatever, and he's saying, look, you need to get rid of these
Right.
heretics. You need to get rid of all these people they're pulling you the other way, right?
Mhm.
So that is them themselves persecuting themselves. This is the
Right.
schism within Christianity and within true Judaism. So
Mhm.
there's true Judaism and there's the synagogue of Satan, in other words, as it speaks of in his letters to
Right.
the churches. And there is the true apostles, and then there are the false apostles. And again, in
Right.
3rd John, what do you see? You see one of them named by name, some guy named Diotrephes who loves to
Mhm.
have the preeminence, right? And
Right.
he's obviously an example of a false apostle,
You
and he
got
doesn't
that right.
accept he doesn't accept John,
He won't even let John in his church.
John, or his adherents, and
Right.
anybody else who would help them. That's the kind of pressure that they were putting on people in the early church. It was in effect while the apostles were still alive. And that's probably
Right.
why John lived the longest, because he was going to be a living example of just how it was that an actual apostle would be treated. You know what I'm saying? And it sort of
I
defines the time
know.
frame.
Wow. Right.
So you say, well, how could this have gone on for 2,000 years? Well, how could it have happened in their lifetimes?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You tell me. I mean,
Exactly.
when they're gone, who is there to speak for them? Who's
Right.
there to speak for Jude? Who's going to do it? Who's there to fight for the faith? All the Diotrephes, all the Hermogenes, all these the people that came along that opposed these truths, um, they set us back 2,000 years, and it was because the initially people just could not pay attention to the word, would not understand the knowledge or whatever, and they fell through an inner schism. And
Mhm.
so Jesus then goes into kind of a lamentation at this point, right? Like,
Right.
woe to you, right? He says, oh, you wretched, oh, you unfortunates, oh, you dissemblers of the truth, oh, you falsifiers of knowledge, oh, you sinners against the Spirit, do you even now dare to listen when it behooved you to speak from the beginning? Do you even now dare to sleep when it behooved you to be awake from the beginning, in order that the kingdom of heaven might receive you? In truth, I say to you that it is easier for a holy one to sink into defilement, and for a man of light to sink into darkness, than for you to reign, or even not to reign. So just going back, how are they wretched? How are they unfortunate? In what way are they dissemblers of the truth? In what way are they falsifiers of knowledge? In what way are they sinners against the Spirit? Okay? Well, they're
They're keeping
wretched because
everything
they're
on the
not going to
physical.
allow themselves
They're
on the
keeping
physical.
everything
Yeah,
on the
that's right.
physical
And
level,
so,
and so
well,
they're losing out on the true message of the word, which is to get us to understand that, yes, while we have the example in the physical, it's to get us to see what is meant in the spiritual or in the heavenly.
I think about what Jesus said to the Laodiceans. You know, the Laodiceans are just fat and happy and could care less, right?
Right.
And they say, "Oh, I've got wealth and I've got, whatever. I'm all good." Right? And he says,
Mhm.
You do not
Need
know that you were
nothing.
poor and miserable and naked and blind,
Mhm.
right? Anoint your eyes with eye salve. In other words, see with your spiritual eyes. Clean out the old physical stuff,
Right.
right? So that you may see, right? He says, Whoever I love, right, I chasten.
Mhm.
Okay? So he's given James and Peter here the business, right?
He
Because
is
of their
because he cares
indifference. Well,
about
he
him.
really is, but because he cares about them. That's
Right.
exactly right. You know? And so he's letting them know. He's saying, look, you're dissemblers of the truth. In what way are they dissemblers of the truth? I just gave you an example. Why is Jude 3 books removed from Second Peter where it belongs? Because falsifiers of knowledge falsified that knowledge. People who pretended to have the truth, dissemblers, in other words,
Mhm.
um,
And the way they
they
interpret
pretended to know
scripture
the truth.
to use it as a tool to
Okay, so
enslave the populace, you know.
he's saying that Judaism and Christianity, as it is passed down to us, is a pretense of truth. They're dissemblers of truth, but they are in fact wretched and miserable, right?
Mhm.
Like the Laodiceans, and
Mhm.
that they are active falsifiers of knowledge. And I just demonstrated that too. Jude says he's the seventh from Adam. Christians, Jews, scholars, whatever come along and say, nope, no, he's not.
No,
They
he wasn't
falsify it.
talking about a real book. He wasn't talking about real books, what they
Yeah,
say.
exactly. But that is a way in which they are falsifiers of knowledge, right?
Right.
Even now, I've been saying this for 20 years. And it's amazing how deaf and blind and wretched people can be. Because in all truth, if people had any honesty, they would do a gut check and
Mhm.
look at the actual facts. But these are in these days especially, but because of 2,000 years of false teachings or whatever, people are so blind and so deaf. You're not dealing with the Bereans here. You're dealing with Laodiceans. All right, you're not
Right.
dealing with people who even bother to check for what was true.
Right.
You're dealing with
Well, my preacher said that this
people
is
who are
this.
comfortable with dismissing prophets in
Mhm.
favor of a preacher,
Mhm.
and you think that's going to fly in front of God? That may
Oh,
fly in front
I
of
don't want to be
men,
there. I
all
don't even
right?
want to
That may
see him
fly
be
in
part
this
of it.
world, right? And again, I don't know how many people who listen here are preachers or whatever. I know I get the occasional one who'll tell me that this is eye opening to them.
Yes,
But
occasionally.
I'm not going to hold my breath and wait for the church to come to me, because I know that they lack this integrity. And this is exactly what Jesus is pointing out. And this is what all of you out there need to understand. If you are not able to accept falsehood, all right, if you go by truth only, then this kind of teaching is for you. If you're the kind of person who's satisfied with calling God's prophets liars just because your preacher man or whatever tells you that that's the case.
Right.
I don't even know what to say to such a person. Like even
Well,
Jesus, what
Lord
he
have
he didn't know what
mercy.
to even do with such a person.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
maybe so. But in any case, so he continues. But I'm just saying that's the way in which they are dissemblers, the way in which they falsify, or they pretend to be something they're not,
And it
or how
becomes
they're
tradition, and that's the way we've always done it, and that's what we've
exactly.
always
And,
believed,
and so what you
and that's
worship
my
is
story, and I'm
tradition
sticking
instead of
to it.
God.
That's
That's right.
exactly
So
the
you
view.
worship but you worship some man's opinion or
Right.
some, and actually against what God says.
Exactly.
This isn't even something peripheral. This strikes at the very heart of what God is saying.
Right.
So be careful. I got people telling me to be careful. I'm saying I don't know, but if I stand with the prophets, at least I have standing. If you stand
Yes.
against the prophets, I don't see where your standing is.
No, I don't. I don't
Because
know.
at some point, that you're going to be confronted with actual fact and actual truth. And you're going to actually have to account for what you said and what you did. And if it's not in accord with the Bible, you know, see, and this is why the mystery has to be taken away. Like even Paul says this. He says, look, because they did not love the truth,
Right.
God is going to send them a strong delusion so that they might believe a lie. And why is this? Why does that even make sense? It's like what we were talking about before. You are accountable for what you know.
Mhm.
Jesus even says, look, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The fact that you would believe the physical over the spiritual is a curse, but it's the kind of thing that God allows to happen because you're less blameworthy because of it. He's protecting you by giving you something plausible to believe, even though it is false, for the purposes of lessening your guilt.
It's a
Okay?
loophole.
Sort of. It's a
It's a
grace, is what it
loophole.
is. It's
Yes,
a
it's all
grace.
grace.
It
Right.
is
It's
a
a
grace
loophole.
because it's better for you to enter maimed into the kingdom of heaven than to have your right eye, your right hand, in other words, to have this full knowledge.
Mhm.
And with that knowledge, walk right into Gehenna. Because, see,
Right.
all these people at the early church, all of these people of the Jews who had this revelation given to them during that little 100-year period or whatever, 200-year period where this stuff was kind of known, all right? The people in the early church, okay, when they turned their back on the truth, they turned their back on a spiritual interpretation that they could understand.
Right.
And that made them more guilty. When you blowed off Jude because what you were told, you're
Mhm.
still blowing off Jude, but you're following the example of something, and you don't have anyone out there telling you otherwise. Okay, so then you don't have a basis. You don't have a baseline for thinking any other way. Okay,
Right.
but it necessitates you being kind of ignorant. It necessitates you being in a very low state of spirituality. You
Mhm.
understand? It necessitates you having a very small spirit in order for you to have any kind of forgiveness at all.
Right.
Because God can look at you and say, He didn't know. He didn't know.
Right.
It was not given for
Just
them to
just
understand.
disobeyed
But what we but
Christ and
but
and
okay,
not
so but how does the devil hear the scriptures? Let's say you're the devil, and you hear Paul say something like, "Because they did not love the truth, God will send them a strong delusion, so that they might believe a lie." The
well,
devil's like, hmm.
I'm gonna put together
Well, I
a
mean,
whole
let me
of
see. Let
lies
me
and
let me
these lies
undermine
against
their
me.
lie. Yeah, well, let me undermine their desire for truth. Now, how does he do that? Well, with the Laodiceans, for example, he just made them fat and happy.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? Devil
Right.
knows that if you're sitting on easy street and you got nothing really bad, going for you or whatever,
Right.
then you're useless to God. You know what I'm saying? He
If you're
wanted the
content
Christians to
in your
be
plan, right?
prosperous, right?
Mhm.
Because that comfortable position put them in such a way that they would not love the truth.
Right.
Right? I mean, I can't tell you the number of people I go to that are just so self-satisfied,
Mhm.
right? That even though they can't counter or even argue against anything what I'm saying, it's like, but I'm just happy believing what I want to believe, or I'm just happy. You know what I'm saying? That's the kind of place that Satan wants people, not loving the truth enough to care.
To seek it out. Mhm.
Right. So because of that, they are then subject to the strong delusion. Instead of seeing the spiritual nature of these words, they see only the physical nature of these words. They see only Peter as Peter and James as James and Jesus as Jesus and waves as waves and etc. Okay, and that's all they see because they don't they don't love the truth enough, right,
Mhm.
to overcome this strong delusion, right?
Right.
But this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to give people eye salve here, so that
Mhm.
they can anoint their eyes, so that they
Nudge them a
can
little
see,
bit from their sleep, you know.
and to kind of give them some gold that's been tried by the fire, and saying, look, that over this 2,000 years, this scripture has value added, and it has
Right.
been refined by the fires of this age and its trials. All
Right.
right. And that if you overcome, you'll receive that third pillar. Remember, there was James, Peter,
That
and
hidden
then
manna.
John's the third one. So you'll receive that third dispensation. If you overcome, you'll receive that hidden manna. Remember, in the Ark of
Amen.
the Covenant, there was the tables of the law. That's the Old Testament. There was Aaron's rod that budded. That's the New Testament. And then the New Testament come alive at the end of the age with all of this meaning added to it. And
Amen.
then there, because you have seen that budding of that rod, of that cannon bearing fruit,
Mhm.
that opens that jar of manna for you to then eat. So
Right.
all of these promises that he's promising you, um, Peter talks about this. When that day dawns and that morning star arises in your heart, he's dating it. The day is the seventh day, or the true
Mhm.
Sabbath. So he's
Right.
dating it. So that's now.
Yes, it is.
Okay? Now, when Jesus says that if you overcome,
We
that
eat
is to
manna on
say,
the seventh
on the
day.
seventh day,
Mhm.
right? Then that
Mhm.
morning star will arise in your heart. So he says, I will give you the morning star. That is to say, he will give you himself, because he identifies himself also in Revelation as that bright and morning star. So
And the
Peter
word.
is saying Jesus is going to rise up in your heart.
Yes.
Okay? The word is going to rise up in your heart. The logos is going to rise up in your heart. That's what I'm
Love.
saying is happening. Okay? So in other words, it is important. You can't just like hear this stuff and be all kind of blasé about it, because it has all that import. And if you are kind of blasé about it, right, then you're part of the problem. And that's what Jesus is telling James and Peter. He's like, you guys are part of the problem here. You're really not part of the solution, because you're not all in,
Mhm.
right? So he's saying, look, therefore do I say to you, be sober. Do not go astray. All right? So going
Mhm.
astray is drunkenness. Being
Mhm.
sober is staying on the straight and narrow. All
Right.
right? So sobriety means having your wits about you, right? Understanding in truth and accurately, right? Not the way other people do. And this is in many times I have said to you all together, that is to say the Jews and the Christians, and also to you alone, James, right? Why? Because there were Jews before Christians. So he came to the Jews. This is why
Right.
he's saying, I spoke to you alone. Because look, I went first to the Jews, then I went to the Gentiles. All right?
Right.
But in either case, it didn't matter. He says, I have said, be saved, right? Do you think
Right.
anybody's going to be saved just because he said to be saved,
Well,
right?
he said, if I bid you, you will not come. So it doesn't matter.
Right?
He's putting it
And
out
then he,
there. If we want it, we will reach out and seek out what he has promised.
and he says, and I have commanded you to follow me. Remember, he
Mhm.
said earlier, nobody's going to follow me just because I say,
Right.
right?
Just because I
And
bid
I
you,
have
just
taught
because I
you
tell you.
the response in the presence of the rulers or the archons. That is to say, look, when you are confronted with the spiritual backlash, that is to say, from Satan and his minions, they're going to say, oh, but you're a sinner. And you're going to say,
Mm-hmm.
well, does it matter? He said, look, at the end, you just go down to the ends of the streets and you gather all the people, whether they are good or whether they are bad, right? And invite them to the feast. And you
Right.
can say, look, even if I'm not perfect, guess what? I'm still going to the feast, right?
Right.
I'm still invited because it says whether good or bad. So that covers it, right? Just
Right.
go, right? So the point is, you have answers for everything. And all these demonic teachings, these doctrines of demons that have taken root within the church and within Christianity and within Christians themselves, unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
you have answers for all of those demonic teachings. You have the responses to give to those rulers, right? So as to make them afraid of you, because
Mm-hmm.
you threaten their kingdom. You're able to turn with the trump card of truth, with the trump
Right.
card of knowledge. You're able to take that whole house of cards and just knock it right down. And that's the truth. The fact is, they don't have a leg to stand on. They have all this reason to stand on, but you have been denied the spiritual truth. And now that the spiritual truth is being revealed, because it is the seventh day, and the morning star is now rising in our hearts because of the day, we are
Mhm.
able to shine this great light to the world. All
Right.
right? And so, again, he says, look, I commanded you to follow me, and I have taught you the response in the presence of the rulers. Observe that I have descended, and I have spoken, and I have troubled myself, and I have received my crown when I saved you. For I have descended to dwell with you in order that you also may dwell with me. Okay, so going on, he says, do you even now dare to listen? Right?
Mhm.
Well, when it behooved you to speak from the beginning. Well, again, what does he mean by speak from the beginning? Look, this message should never have died out. This
Right.
message should never have fallen prey to the message of the flesh.
Mhm.
Okay? It never should have succumbed to worldly thinking. The James should have had a little more courage, I think, than to ask to be spared, right?
Well,
Had uh-huh.
it says, "Do you even now dare to sleep when it behooved you to be awake from the beginning?" I'm seeing the parallel of sleep being reason and awake being the spiritual understanding.
Well, sleep is that.
It's
Sleep is
sleep is
symbolized as
reason.
it's a spiritual sleep. Like, I mean, if
Right,
you want to know the meaning of anything, uh-huh.
but it's going into, when you're sleepy or sleeping and you're not understanding, being awake
Hmm.
to the spiritual understandings, then sleep. I don't think it's saying, you're actually asleep. It's saying that you're kind of in a daze or you know, an, you know how when you're kind of sleepy or drowsy, how you're not thinking clearly, but you
Yeah,
may,
it's kind of muddled. Yeah, you're kind of that
kind of
twilight.
muddled,
Yeah.
right? Kind of
Well, again,
twilighty. I'm seeing
well,
that
it's
as symbolic of reason. Then
right, right.
being
Well, I mean, well, first of all, he says, "Are you even now daring? Do you even now dare to listen when it behooved you to speak from the beginning?" In other words, you had this knowledge from the beginning, and you should have spoken it. And now,
right. You
because you
should have
didn't
taught it to
speak
everybody.
it, well, but now because you didn't speak it, there's need for you to listen now, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
he's telling him that there's a falling away that's implied in that statement. And it says, "Do you even now dare to sleep when it behooved you to be awake from the beginning?" See, if they had been awake, if they had been spiritually awake, and
Right.
if they had had the courage, let's say, and the wisdom to have spoken from the beginning, if they had been sober, if they had been awake, right,
Mhm.
then they would not have had to have been woken up. They would not have had to listen to it all over again,
Right.
because Judaism and Christianity, he's saying you should never have fallen away. You should have held on. It was enough for you to have this from the beginning. All right,
Right.
but because you went to spiritual sleep or whatever, now you don't.
Mhm.
Right? In order that the kingdom of heaven might receive you, right? In
Mhm.
truth, I say to you, but he's not. He's saying, look, the Father has no need of you. In other words, the Christians and the Jews will not be received by the kingdom of heaven because they fell asleep and because they were silent.
Right.
Okay? And because of that, the kingdom of heaven will not make their home in their houses because their houses are vulnerable, they're unprotected, right? In other words, they're not stable, they're not steady, they're not complete, they're not right. There's something wrong with their institutions, their houses. Okay? He's saying the kingdom of heaven cannot receive you because you have to be receptive to it in order for it to receive you. It kind of depends on you. You have to speak in order for it to hear you. You have to be awake in order for it to respond to you. All right? Otherwise, it will not receive you, and it hasn't. Okay? It has preserved them. They exist to this day. There may be some protection there based on the fact that they haven't known this stuff and are therefore less guilty of it, especially those of us of a later generation, right? Rather than those who
Right.
actively opposed it in the beginning and knew full well what it was. He
Right.
minimized the number of those people by allowing us to be sort of lulled to sleep and to be silent about things that we should not have been silent about. But because they were lulled to sleep and because they were silent about things that they should have spoken out about, right? Then the kingdom of heaven has no need of them and will not receive them, because it only responds to truth, it only responds to sincerity, it only responds to that which is of itself in you.
Mhm.
If there's not any of that in you, if you are lacking those things and have no desire to cultivate those things, then it won't have a way to use you other than, just to kind of keep you in this low level of whatever until somebody else can come along and save you. Okay? Until somebody else can come along and speak to you things that you now have to listen to. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
He says, and in truth, I say to you that it is easier for a holy one to sink into defilement and for a man of light to sink into darkness than for you to reign or even not to reign. He's saying, look, that they may think that they're reigning, but
Mhm.
their reign, in other words, the reign of Christianity and the reign of Judaism, isn't
Right.
really reigning. Okay?
Right.
They think that they have an institution, that they have an organization, that they are part of a great history and a great tradition. And Jesus is saying, nah, that's not really it. That's not quite it. He's saying it's easier for a holy one to sink into defilement and for a man of light to sink into darkness than for you to reign or even not to reign. Why? Because look, the man of light is going to be darkened. He's going to be stomped out. Some of this is the church's fault.
Mhm.
They went after who people they called heretics, and they killed
Right.
them.
They
They
did.
silenced them one way or the other, but they killed a lot of people, right? And
Right.
so those people who knew the mystery did fade into darkness, all right? And a
Right.
holy one sinking into defilement. Look, when you take some concept that it has this higher meaning, and you defile it by putting it in the lower meaning,
Right.
right? He's saying, look, this is the kind of thing that you're doing. You're taking and defiling that which is holy. You're taking and benighting or causing to sink into darkness, if you will, that man of light.
Mhm.
Okay? So, in other words, if all for the sake of your desire to reign or your desire to rule,
For
which is not
power.
really ruling,
Mhm.
you're not reigning in his way, you're reigning in the world's way,
Right.
right? So he's contrasting the fleshly reign or the fleshly rule with the spiritual reign or the spiritual rule. He's saying, though you may reign in the physical, you will not reign in other words, in the spiritual.
Right.
In terms of holiness and in terms of light, what you
Mhm.
actually are is defiled, and what you actually are is dark. And
Mhm.
so you do not reign because of that.
Mhm.
And let me see. Okay, so it goes on. I have remembered your tears and your grief and your sorrow. They are far from us. Now then, you who are outside the inheritance of the Father, weep where it behooves you, and grieve, and proclaim that which is good, since the Son is ascending appropriately. In truth, I say to you, had it been to those who would listen to me that I was sent, and had it been to them that I was to speak, I would never have descended upon the earth. And now then, be ashamed on account of them, right? So, in other
Right.
words, what
That's
he was
pretty
saying
deep
before,
right there.
yeah,
That's
it's
pretty deep.
that's a
He's saying if, if I was just going to come down and talk to people that would listen to me, eh, I wouldn't have
well,
even had to come. They would have just listened to me anyway.
that's what I was getting
I
at
had to
before.
come down here and whip you guys into shape and try to get through your thick skulls what I need
Well,
you to.
what he had to do was die for them.
Yeah, yeah.
No, no, listen, go back. It says in the previous page, it says, "Observe that I have descended." Right? Had it been to
Uh-huh.
those that would listen to me, I would never have had to descend.
Right.
Now, what does he
Right, right.
say? Observe that I have descended, parenthetically, because of you.
Right.
And I have
That's right.
spoken, and I have troubled myself, and I have received my crown when I saved you.
Right.
Okay? For I have descended with you to dwell with you in order that you also may dwell with me. right?
Right. It was mercy. It was
Okay,
absolute
so
mercy.
but when he says, had it been to those who would listen to me that I was sent, instead of you who didn't listen to me, you who
Right.
want to contradict everything I say, meaning James, meaning Peter, meaning the Jews, meaning the Christians. I mean the false Jews and the false Christians, the people who allowed the mystery to slide into darkness because they didn't speak out. Look, I mean, who spoke on Jude's behalf, right? Who spoke on, you know what I'm saying? It's just no, there wasn't that spirit of
Right.
actually defending God's word so that the word slid into defilement and into darkness,
Right.
right? And it says, in truth, I say to you, had it been to those who would listen to me that I sent, and it was with them that I was to speak, I would never have descended upon the earth. And now then, be ashamed on account of them. In other
Right.
words, there are people out there who are better than you, but I saved you anyway,
Right.
right?
Right. I mean, it's
Well, but
just
that's
God's
exactly what
awesome
he's saying.
mercy.
That's exactly what he's saying. That's a pretty harsh thing to
It's
be
pretty
told.
harsh, but it just goes to prove His
Well,
mercy.
he's just laying it straight, and
Like,
and he
wow.
it is mercy. Yeah, he says, but behold, I shall depart from you, and I am going, and I do not desire to remain with you any longer. Just as, no, but
I'm
it gets
sorry.
bad.
I'm
It gets
sorry.
bad.
It's because they're so hard-headed, and that's why
This is
he's being so harsh. He's just like,
well,
gosh, you guys won't even listen. You wanna,
yeah. You want the easy way
argue
out?
with
Yeah,
me at
exactly.
every turn. You want the easy way out. You don't want to
And,
listen.
and
That you
and
have
there are
to.
people who are better than you.
Right.
uh,
Yeah. If you
that's
want to wake up and do what I say, he says, just
yeah.
as yourselves have not desired, you know, then now follow me quickly.
Why does he say
Get up
quickly?
off of it.
Well, no. Think about it. Where is the term quickly used? Remember when he talks to Judas, he says, "Look, what you're going to do quickly." Right?
Ah, you
Judas is
you mean
symbolic.
yeah. Mhm.
Well, I mean, okay, take up somebody like Diotrephes, for example, because I like picking on him because he loves to have the preeminence.
Right.
Um, but he's a real bad dude. I mean, he's even opposing the actual beloved apostle
John,
of Jesus.
right.
Yeah, so you know what I'm saying? So he's obviously got his head screwed on wrong. Okay,
Yeah.
just saying. All right. Now, this is he Judas typifies this kind of Christian. Judas is an example, just as Peter represents the church, and just as James represents the Jews, and John represents the elect, those three pillars, three people, the
Mhm.
Jews, the Christians, and the elect who are to come, the children, right? Um, then Judas represents those who feign a love of Jesus.
Oh,
Because
with
he
his
goes
like
up
the
to
kiss.
Jesus and kisses him.
That Judas
Now, I'm
kiss, yes.
sure that Diotrephes in his church, that his people were convinced that he loved Jesus better than Eve and John,
Oh
right?
yeah.
You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? You can almost see this, right?
He was a good con man.
Okay, but what? So, in other words, what? But Judas symbolizing these people when he says, "Go and do what you do quickly," and then it was night, night being symbolic of the age.
Mhm.
It means that the truth is subverted just like that, just immediately. And you see that with Diotrephes, because even while the Apostle John is still alive, he and his disciples are not welcomed in his church,
Right.
right? So that was quick. You see what I'm saying? In other
Mhm.
words, the Christian message was subverted almost immediately, right? So
Right.
when he says, now follow me quickly, right?
Mhm.
What does it mean? It means beat this Judas teaching, right? In other
Right.
words, you need to be just as quick about this as the devil is.
Right.
Okay? You need to be on this like he is, right?
Need to jump in head first and never look
You
back.
got to do it now while
Mhm.
it's still possible to be filled, like he mentioned earlier.
Right.
But they're not going to do it. And
No.
so he says, therefore I say to you, for your sake I have descended. You are the beloved. You are those who will become a cause of life to many. And in what way? Because God's going to use them despite their faults.
Mhm.
For example, let's say they're not faithful, but like as in this letter, they serve as an object lesson.
Mhm. A
They
living parable.
serve as an example. In other words, even though James and Peter aren't faithful, we of a later generation, when we uncover the meaning of these secret letters, these hidden meanings,
Mm-hmm.
right, and we recognize the history in them, because even Barnabas in his little transition chapter in his own letter, he says, "Look, if I were to tell you about things that are happening now or things that
You
are
wouldn't.
to come, you
Mm-hmm.
would not understand them because they are they are in parables, that they lie
You
in
wouldn't.
parables."
That you wouldn't be able to handle it.
Well,
It's
so
the
so go
gist
back and
of it.
go back and retrofit that. So the things that are hidden in parables are what? Things that are to come and things that are happening now.
Oh, uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So what it means is that when you finally do understand the parables, what is going to be the content of those parables? The content of those parables is going to be a description of things that happened in the early church, things that are happening
Right.
now, in other words,
Mm-hmm.
right? And things that would happen as a result or subsequent to that.
Right.
So the content of the parables, according to Barnabas, is things that are happening now and things that are going to happen. That's his definition of what is contained within parables that they would not understand, presumably because they didn't have the vision to see the future and probably didn't have the intuition to understand the parables the way that
He
he did.
even said that they wouldn't be able to bear it. You know.
Right.
It was
So,
real.
but in other words, when you see this expose on the church
Right.
in Judaism, okay, which is kind of what this is, right?
Right.
You understand that that's the kind of thing that parables contain, is teachings on the early church and things that happen thereafter. So that's what you look for. And this is what we're finding here. So that even though Peter and James kind of dropped the ball and aren't really on board with the whole thing like they're supposed to be, right? Even in their failure, God has found a way to protect them and to make some use of their failings.
Right.
So he says, okay, um, yeah, okay. So he says, therefore I say to you, for your sake I have descended. You are the beloved, and you are those who will become a cause of life for many. And again, I think what happens is that James and Peter, because of this chastising that they get or whatever, they kind of change their tune a little bit later. James is writing this book to the elect, and he's a little humbled at the end. Don't want to get too
Mm-hmm.
far ahead of myself, but just to kind of there's a little adumbration here. And also, Peter, as you see, takes Jude to himself and sees a need to defend Jude later on. So they do
Mm-hmm.
kind of get
In the
turned around here.
canonical. Mm-hmm.
They do kind of get turned around here. But see, they're at that point they're all in as far as deferring to the later generation.
It's like they got their whooping and they went and did better.
Well, Jesus is telling them now about these other people. So all of their writings, and you see this in the canonicals too, all of their writings contain messages about that future generation.
Right.
So this is a genuine teaching, regardless of whether you believe this source or not. That is what is contained within the New Testament anyway. So it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter whether you believe it or not, it
They've been
still is
told
there.
something different. A lot of people are told that these elect are Jews that are left behind after a doctrine called the rapture, which we know that to be untrue. It's a it's a
It's failing to read it on the parabolic level. That's what it is.
mhm.
It looks like it's that, but it's only in the natural. Um,
Right,
that you have to understand the clouds of witnesses, the air, um, all that has different
right,
significance. But what I'm getting at
right.
here with this is he's done with Judaism and Christianity, is
Mhm.
what he's saying.
Right.
But I still love you guys, and you
I
guys are
still
still
love
going
you
to
guys.
be of benefit. But there's still of
Right.
benefit to us. Well, look,
You have
we
work
don't
to
have
do. You still have
right,
work to do, boys.
but you guys have made it to where I have to go to those who listen to me because you won't.
Right.
So he's kind of pinning it on them. He's like, you know what? This is really your fault that I have to go to get other people who would listen to me. Because I had
Right.
to come down and die physically so that later on you would understand the parallel between my physical death and my spiritual death. you would
Yes.
understand the parallel between the death of the man and the death of the logos. Right?
Exactly. The word.
But
Mhm.
you won't know that because you're going to be fixated on the physical. All
Mhm.
right? And so now everything's going to be written in such a way as to have both meanings.
Right.
All right? So that if you
Absolutely.
ever do come around, right, or other people do come around and show you, then you can be saved. Right? If
Right.
you listen, if you
Yeah.
pay attention,
Yeah.
which is a big if, right? But he says, look, beseech the Father, implore God often, and he will give to you. Right?
Absolutely.
They're still blessed by God. But he says, look, blessed is the one who has seen you with him when he is proclaimed among the angels and glorified among the saints. Yours is life. Well, again, who seeing them among them when he is glorified among the saints or whatever. When you think about it, the saints being that third generation or whatever are still grateful to the Christians and are still grateful to the Jews. In
Right.
fact, their role literally is to go back to the Christians and to go back to the Jews with this truth, right? So that they can be saved. And
Right.
therefore, the one who has seen you with him, whatever, when he is proclaimed among the angels and glorified among the saints, right? Well, in other words, God hasn't forgotten about them,
Right.
right? He's saying, look, you're still a part of the equation. It's just
Right.
that you're no longer actively aware of it. All
Mhm.
right. You're no longer a part of, by being, in a sense, by being part of the problem and not part of the solution. If the solution that does come along is able to point out and to unravel what is in effect the problem, thereby making it no longer problematic, right? Then it becomes of use. So
Mhm.
maybe Judaism hasn't taken over the world, and maybe Christianity hasn't taken over the world, because last time I checked, there were still other religions and evil people and all this other stuff. They haven't finished the job, right?
Well,
So,
and the thing of it is, I think that that's just it. It's not religion. It's relationship. That's what has to change. Can't be religion. Did I lose you?
no, I'm here. But that's the point. Is the point is that they're still part of the equation. All right,
Right.
they're still part of that. So it says, "Yours is life. Rejoice and be glad as children of God." In other words, when you're converted.
Right.
Right? Because the children are the elect, a third grouping of people. So when they become like them, which is when everybody's all together on the same page, right?
Mhm.
It says, "Keep His will in order that you might be saved." All right, take reproof from me and save yourselves. In other words, he starts telling them to write to these other people, right?
Mhm.
So as long as they do that, they're keeping His will. And
Right.
because of the fact that they're saving those who are to come by means of the secrets contained in their letters,
Mhm.
they become part and parcel with the salvation of those people, because those people could not be saved without their works.
Right. They share in the labors.
They share in the labors, and therefore they share in the reward. And that's the
Exactly.
way in which God has have saved their bacon, because
Mhm.
He's made it so that they're used anyway despite their failings.
Mhm.
Okay, so He's thought around them. All right.
Mhm.
And he says, "Take reproof from me and save yourselves. I intercede on your behalf with the Father, and he will forgive you much." All right. So even though they slip, even though they fail, God has worked around that. He's
Right.
figured out a solution. And and Jesus has interceded with him in the sense that he's made the problem part of the solution. And
Right.
so he's taken them despite their failings and made them useful anyway. And so that's a grace. And it says,
Yes.
when we heard these things, again, spiritually heard them, we became elated, right? So they understood this fully at that point, or more or less
Right.
fully. And it says, for we had been depressed on account of what we had said earlier. Um, Again, because they kind of felt bad about contradicting Jesus, and they kind of felt bad about not really living up to what they probably knew they should have lived up to. Okay, and so now they're happy because like, oh, okay, so we get to be saved anyway. Good, yay, yay, yay,
Yeah,
right?
yay.
Okay, so they're all about yeah, because but that in a way that's kind of them being natural again, right?
Right.
They've lost their whole sense of severity because they feel like they're off the hook now, right?
Right.
And so Jesus sees that, but what does he see? He's thinking to himself, man, you guys just you're like one way or the other, right? You're really not seeing what I'm getting at here. Okay?
No.
You're
And
not
he's going to have
serious
to
enough here.
reprimand them again.
He says, well, but again, woe to you who are in want of an advocate. Woe to you
Right.
who are in need of grace, right? He's saying, look, I intercede on your behalf. But who is the
Right.
advocate? Who is the advocate?
Jesus.
Well,
Jesus is
yeah.
our
Well,
advocate.
in any
Right?
case, he's saying you're in
Because
need
he's
of
interceding. He's
right,
saying that you ought to
or
be
the
on.
Spirit.
You ought to be in on this to where I don't need to, plead with the Father and intercede with the Father for
Yeah,
you. You should
that's right.
already be. You should
He's saying
already be everything you're supposed to be.
yeah, because had I been sent to those who would have listened to me or whatever, I would never have needed to come down. They're less of a
Right.
need of an advocate than the Jews and the
Right.
Christians are, or Peter and
Right.
whatever. So woe to you who are in need of grace. In other words, woe to you who like need me to work around your problems, right?
Right.
It says, blessed are those who have spoken freely and produced grace for themselves, right? And how do you do that? You produce the grace by having spoken the truth freely, right?
Right.
Where he says when it behooved you to speak from the beginning,
Mhm.
right? But they didn't speak from the beginning. They didn't speak out, right? And so somebody comes along and speaks freely and says,
Mhm.
look, this is the truth regardless,
Right.
right? This is the truth whether you like it or not. Okay? It's still there. All you know what I'm saying? In other words, but that produces grace.
Mhm.
Not only for themselves, but if you think about it, it produces grace for everybody else, right?
Right.
It becomes useful to other people, and so I'm hoping what we produce as a group of people, just from our hearts or whatever, from our collective labors and from sharing and from working and producing our own works and doing all this, is to share with the church what this grace is, and to share with the Jews and share with the whole world just what it is that God has left for us to find, because He has left, so many things for us to find, and all of these things produce grace. They produce spiritual fruits, and so we become lights and all that for the world. It says, okay, so he says, liken yourselves to foreigners. That is to say, of the kingdom of God. They're outside of the kingdom. Why
Mhm.
are you troubled when you oust yourselves of your own accord and depart from your own city? So their true city would be like being true Jews and true
Mhm.
Christians, okay, and embracing what it is that God and Jesus have put upon them, in to speak from the beginning, to understand, to listen, to pay attention to the Word, to be to do what is right of their own accord without being asked, to just have it within them. But what do? They turn around and they focus on the flesh as opposed to the spirit. Now, the city is spiritual, but the kingdom that they choose is carnal,
Mm.
right? And so they oust themselves. They're like foreigners. In the kingdom of
Right.
God, we are spiritual. In the kingdom of man, we are fleshly. We are carnal, right?
Right.
So he says, well, what sort are they in the estimation of your city? Um, Foreigners. In other words, people who are without, what is their value? Right? Why are you troubled when you oust yourselves of your own accord and depart from your own city? Right? You become just like the foreigners. You become just like the Gentiles. You become just like those without.
Mhm.
Right? So it says, like, why do you abandon your dwelling place of your own accord? Right? And this is the key, readying it for those who desire to dwell in it. Well, again, because this is the nature of this letter and how this is passed on to those of us of the future who do desire to dwell in it, right? Those
Mhm.
who do desire to hear his word, those who do desire to listen to him, right? Well, they have made it ready for us, in a sense, by abandoning it themselves, They have made way for that third group of people because they themselves gave up that treasure of their own accord.
Right.
And by so doing, then the scriptures and everything that are left to us expose them, right? Then they
Right.
have laid the groundwork for us plowing and digging this treasure up out of the ground, out of this earthly terminology, and
Mhm.
seeing the treasure of the Spirit, right? And having money in a sense to lend at interest to whomever we please,
Mhm.
right? Because we actually have access to this treasure because we wanted to find this treasure. We desired to dwell in this city, right?
Right.
And then he says, look, he says, oh, you exiles and fugitives, right? Woe to you, because you will be caught, right? So here he's talking about, again, the synagogue of Satan and the false apostles or whatever, in the guise of the true Christians and in the guise of the true Jews, right?
Uh-huh.
That they are setting themselves up, that they're leaving the true city for a fake one. They're leaving the truth for falsehood. They've become dissemblers. They've become falsifiers of truth and falsifiers of knowledge. All right,
Mhm.
that's their function. They are the Judases, if you will,
Mhm.
figuratively speaking. Right? It says, but because you will be caught. And this letter is in effect a condemnation of them, and it is in effect a way in which they are caught. Because now he's articulated it in so many words. He's spoken it expressly, right? That they will be caught in the sense that they will be exposed. And he says, or perhaps you imagine that the Father is a lover of humanity, as if to say, the Father loves your little worldly kingdom. The Father loves all these millions of denominations that are out there.
Oh yeah.
And the Father loves the fact that you got believers sitting right there next to unbelievers, unequally yoked, right?
Mhm.
As
Mhm.
if he wanted you
Oh.
to have the nice house and the little white picket fence and the
Oh, and he
2.4 children or
loves
whatever.
that there's some people that have such great wealth financially and other people starving to death. I'm sure he loves that too.
Oh yeah, but what I'm saying is,
I
yeah,
know.
I mean, as if to say that the way in which you're going even makes sense. I mean, come on.
Right.
Do you even begin to think that God is going to respect that kind of attitude? I mean,
No.
come on. I mean, that should be obvious to anybody, right? And he
Should
says, or
be.
that he is persuaded by prayers, as if to say he were human in some way, like he could be snowed or something, you know,
Mhm.
or that he is gracious to one on behalf of another, as if he were a respecter of persons or didn't
Right.
hold everybody to the same standard,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because God's not like that. God's 100%. He's the real deal. He's not gonna like turn a blind eye to something, um, forever. He's gonna
Right.
deal with it at some point,
He does.
or that he bears with one who asks, like, hey, just let me do this one little thing over here. Just let me get away with this, or that he bears with one who asks, meaning, like as if to say, just cut me some slack or whatever. Even James is like, I'll, allow us to not be tempted by the devil.
Right. Right.
And he's like, no, there's some things just because you ask, I'm not going to just let you off.
Right.
So he says, for he knows the desire and also that which the flesh needs. Um, is it not the flesh that desires the soul? Yet the body does not sin without the soul, just as the soul is not saved without the spirit. But if the soul is saved when it is without evil, and if the spirit is also saved, then the body becomes sinless. For it is the spirit which animates the soul, but it is the body that kills it. That is to say, it is the soul which kills itself. Truly I say to you, the Father will not forgive the sin of the soul at all, nor the guilt of the flesh. For none of those who have worn the flesh will be saved. For do you imagine that many have found the kingdom of heaven? Okay, so that's kind of a mouthful.
It
What he's saying
is.
is, what he says, when he knows the desire and also that which the flesh needs. Again,
Right.
he says, look, the Father knows that you need these things. All right.
Right.
So the things that you need are kind of going to come to you mainly because God doesn't want you consumed with flesh. Okay? I mean, and he wants you to realize that he is the one who provides for you, and that it's not what you think it is, that he is the true provider in all this. And so you need to, but he knows all of this stuff that's needful to you. So you don't have to
Right.
go chasing after the flesh, right?
Right.
And you think you desire the flesh, but what he's saying is that the flesh is what desires you. That you're selling out your soul, if you will, to your fleshly desires. It's kind of like when you take economics. Like, what's the first thing they tell you in economics class, like 101 first day, right?
Gosh,
They
you're
tell
you're
you,
you're beyond me on that. I don't know.
they tell you that people have unlimited wants and desires.
They have unlimited wants and
Unlimited
desires.
wants and desires, virtually unlimited. In other words, if you give somebody $1 million, they're going to
They're
live the
gonna want
$1 million
more.
lifestyle. You know what I'm
Oh, I
saying?
see.
You
Mhm.
give them $100,000, they're going to live $100,000 lifestyle. You know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
okay.
You give somebody $50,000, they're going to live the $50,000 lifestyle. Okay, whatever. But the fact that the flesh desires the soul, okay, it means that that which is in the world or whatever is seeking you in a sense for itself. That the world is kind of a deception. And your desires that burn within you, right, affect your thinking, affects your reasoning. Remember, he said that reason is the soul, right?
I see.
So
Uh-huh.
you start thinking, well, I need that new car. I need that new house, right? I need this instead of that, or I need, and so you start thinking about what you want and what you want and what you want. And what
Mhm.
happens is that the soul follows suit. Your soul becomes subject to your fleshly desires. And in the world of capitalism, or in the world of the just basic world economy, right, there's no need to enslave people because they are already enslaved to their passions and
Mm.
their
Mhm.
desires and their ambitions and all that. So you just sell them a whole world of desires and a whole world of ambitions, and they're going to dance around like little monkeys doing everything you tell them to do because their flesh is telling them to do it.
Mhm.
And they're not thinking past it because their souls and their minds are subject to their desires, right? And so the flesh desires the soul, right? In other words, it wants to take all of your reasoning and whatever and subsume it to itself, because the last thing your flesh wants you to do is to turn against it and deny it and say, oh, well, I'm going to deny my appetites, or I'm going to deny my desires, right?
Mhm.
Or I'm going to try to suppress some of the things that I now indulge in, right?
Mhm.
Your body puts up a fight, doesn't it? It doesn't want
Yeah.
you to, but after a while, you eat less, you eventually become less hungry. You indulge less, you think about it less, typically. You know what
Right.
I'm saying?
Right.
So okay, but the body does not sin without the soul. In other words, the soul gives it permission. Like, let's say you're hungry and you want that big old cake, and you know that you shouldn't eat that cake. Like, maybe you should have some celery or something, right? Well, your soul can say, "Look, I don't need this cake. I'll
Right.
take the celery instead." All right.
Mhm.
Today's just not a good day for me to eat cake. Okay. I had cake last week. I need to lay off the cake. All right. So now
Right.
your body doesn't sin because the soul is set right.
I
Okay.
see.
Because your soul is in control. Okay.
Mhm.
And just as the soul is not saved without the spirit. Because again, if the soul is then looking to the spiritual things and
Mm.
denying the flesh because of
Right.
spiritual reasons, in other words, then you can start thinking clearly. In other words, now I don't have vested interests in things. I'm not listening to my passions, in other words. I'm listening to my spirit.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I'm bringing my soul, my reason, in other words, in line with spiritual reality. So now my reason, instead of favoring the flesh and looking downward, say towards the material or towards the vanity of this world,
Mhm.
Vanity Fair here, right? You're looking at you're looking at the kingdom of heaven instead, right? So in other words, you're suspended between these two realities, the fleshly and the spiritual. All right?
Right.
And it really depends on where you're looking. Remember when Peter was out on the sea and he was looking at the logos. Now
Right. He was
he was
fine.
able to walk on the water because his focus was on the spirit. His focus was on the
Right.
logos, and that is what allowed him to transcend and to walk on
Right.
the water even as the logos was transcendent and walking on the water.
Mhm.
Okay? And then, as soon as he started looking at the waves, again, these men, these infiltrators of the church, are wild waves of the sea. These
Right.
waverers
Exactly.
waver like wild waves, as it speaks of in James or whatever. If you start looking at the waverers, if you start
Mhm.
looking at this, the Diotrephes and then like Nicolaitanes and all these other people that are breaking into the church and taking it by force,
Mhm.
right? If you start looking at that, if you start looking at the winds of doctrine, the contrary winds, the blowing gales of false doctrines out there,
Mhm.
instead of right at the logos, you're going to sink
Mhm.
into the world. And that's
Mhm.
what this is saying. He's saying, look, the body does not sin without the soul. In other words, your soul can, you know,
It can
can
be.
curb what your body does
Mhm.
if you want it to, right? And the soul is not saved without the spirit. In other words, it has to look up to something because without the spirit, all it has is the flesh
Mhm.
and itself. But if the soul is saved when it is without evil, and and if the spirit is also saved, then the body becomes sinless. Why? Because the body just falls in line more or less with your soul now that you have become focused on other things, the
On
spiritual
spiritual
things.
matters. Mhm.
So now you're looking entirely the other way and your body falls in line. All right.
Mhm.
So now because you're looking at the good, you're no longer focusing on sin and wallowing in sin. Right?
Right.
And if the spirit is also saved, the body becomes sinless. For it is the spirit which animates the soul, but it is the body that kills it. So death is towards the flesh, and life, animation, whatever, life is towards the spirit. The spirit gives life, but the letter kills, right? The fleshly aspect of the word kills the soul because you're only seeing, again, men as men. You're not seeing winds as doctrine. You're just seeing winds as winds. You're seeing waves as waves, and Jesus just as Jesus, and Peter just, you know what I'm saying? So you're focused on the lower aspects of it, and
The
that kills the
physical.
soul. So that's how that pertains to doctrinally anyway. But I mean, and also in terms of the flesh. I mean, you can drink yourself to death, eat yourself to death, whatever yourself to death,
Mhm.
works on the physical level as well, but that would be the interpretational aspect of it. For it is the soul which kills itself. And you can see that, right? Because it's like, look, as long as you focus on the things that are bad for your health, the things that are bad for your spirit, the things that are bad for your body, just things that are bad in general, right? As long as you focus on those, then now you're focused on the flesh, you're focused on desires, you're focused on ambition, you're focused on, all kinds of things that don't pertain to the kingdom and aren't spiritual. And so now you are in spiritual death, right? It says, truly I say to you, the Father will not forgive the sin of the soul at all, nor the guilt of the flesh. And that's because, okay, like you think about it, the last 2,000 years, right? We're still in this mess
Right.
because God hasn't looked the other way. He's just looked to other people,
Mhm.
right? And so, yeah. So it says, nor will he forgive the guilt of the flesh, because again, the fleshly level meaning, if you will, is the thing that holds us back, right? And that's as it pertains to the scriptures, but it also, in each of us individually, if you indulge in fleshly things, that creates separation from God and spirit, and it leads you to, backsliding and into all kinds of, detrimental stuff. It says,
Right.
for do you imagine that many have found the kingdom of heaven? Well, again, that's one of those rhetorical questions. You look around at Christians and Jews and religious people all over the place, and you just ask yourself, have these people found it?
Mhm.
Are these people on it? Do they got it figured out? I bet if you talk to each one of them individually, they'd say they did. And if I
Right.
bet you asked somebody else about them, they'd probably be like, nah, they don't have it right. I got it right. If you just go on down the line, you could go up, you line them all up, you could ask every one of them, they'd probably say, I got it right, the other guy's got it wrong, right?
Right.
So do you imagine that many have found the kingdom of heaven? In other words, is what you're looking at, is that what you think God wants on this earth? All these people here, do you think they really are godly? right?
Oh my goodness. Are you talking about our modern day world?
Or
No
well,
way.
it's kind of their world too. I mean, the world just always kind of been what it is, you
Well,
know,
yeah, it hadn't
one way
changed
or
that.
another. It's always been wicked from the beginning. He
Right.
says, "Blessed is one who has seen himself as a fourth one in heaven." Well, again, there is the Father, there is the Son, and there is the Holy Spirit, but we are also in the Son, if you will. We are also in the Father. We are also in the Holy Spirit. We are part of them, and they are part of us. And
Right.
that
Part of the
union,
family.
well, okay, like you read, for example, we are human, we are in the flesh. Okay? When
Right.
Jesus came down as a man, he was in the flesh.
Right.
When the angels came down and mixed with the daughters of men,
They had
they
to
also had the
transform.
flesh.
Mhm.
So
Shapeshifted.
we are basically, they call us, they talk about the Trinity, and I don't want to get into that because they're just three different facets of one God. But
Right.
the idea is that we as human beings have a body, we have a soul, and we have a
Spirit.
spirit.
We're
We are ourselves a triune being.
yes, we are. We
So
absolutely
you
are.
ask me, am
I
I my
agree.
flesh? Well,
Yes, I'm
sort of.
flesh.
I don't have a flesh being. I mean, I suppose I could speak of my, the fleshly self if I wanted to, but that's
Right.
all kind of semantical and just sort of a convenient term. But my
Right.
flesh is not separate from my soul, really. And my
No.
soul is not separate from my spirit, really, right?
Right.
So it'd be kind of silly of me to go around talking about my spirit as though it was a third person. I mean, it
Right.
it
Right.
kind of is, I suppose, in a
Right.
way,
It
but it's
kind
still
of is.
me.
It's a different aspect of who you are.
Okay, but in other words,
But we're made in
we
his
are
image.
we are part of him, and he is part of us.
Right. We're made in his image.
So we are, in a sense, the fourth part.
Mhm.
And so when you see that, then you understand that you can't defile yourself without defiling God. And
Wow.
you can't, but that's what I'm saying. In other words,
It is.
you
It is
think
a
you're
lot.
just you think you're just doing your own thing, right?
Mhm.
Well, Paul says that, doesn't he? You're gonna take God and you're gonna unite him with a prostitute.
Right.
Well, it's just the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's no
How could you do
difference.
that? Right.
It's okay. So when we heard these things, we became distressed. So now they realize, oh God, he's still mad at us. Now that he saw that we were distressed, he said, "This is why I say this to you, that you may know yourselves." And he's been laying it
Right.
pretty straight with these guys. I mean, he's
Trying to
been
wake
he's
him
been
up.
telling them, he's been giving them what for, right?
Mhm.
Because he cares about them. Why? He chastens those whom he loves. He says,
Right.
"You are the beloved." So that gives him free reign to chasten you all day long, right? Because he's
Right.
doing it in this world while there's still time for you to mend your ways and do a
Right.
little something, give him a little value added, because he didn't just put you here for yourself, he puts you here to be a part of his overcoming evil. And to
Right.
the extent that you contribute to that as a part of him, in a sense, his virtue lives in you.
Right. Well,
So
the
you can't do anything apart from God. He's already put you in himself and put
right.
himself in you. That's why he can't turn his back on James. That's why he can't turn his back on Peter.
So
He's like,
see,
look,
God
you
is
guys,
totally invested. That's the
well,
thing.
he died for them. He is
Right.
invested in them.
He
That's what
is
he just got through
totally
telling
invested.
them. He said,
Right.
look, I came down here and I died for you, okay? Because
Right.
if I hadn't done this, you'd have been up the creek,
Yeah.
okay? So, but you can't return the favor. Thanks a lot. Let me
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying,
Right. Right. Right.
so, for the kingdom of heaven, he goes on to say, is like an ear of grain, which sprouted in a field. Again, the field is the world. And when it ripened, it scattered its fruit, and in turn filled the field with ears of grain for another year. Okay, so this is describing um, the time of understanding. When the whole world was filled with this life, was filled
Uh
with
huh.
the knowledge. Okay, but it faded away,
Mhm.
right? And there were ears of grain that were for another year. Okay? So
Right.
he's saying all of these little seeds, like all of these little scriptures and all of these little, secret meanings and stuff,
Mhm.
they're all for a future time. and that
Right.
he's left those things to come about. And it says, ye also be zealous to reap for yourselves an ear of life, in order that you may be filled with the kingdom, right?
Mhm.
So, in other words, he's just saying, kind of get on board, okay? Be on this. I'm leaving a little something for somebody else, okay? You guys get on board, okay?
Right.
And so, as long as I am with you, give heed to me and obey me. But when I am to depart from you, remember me, right?
Right.
So in other words, don't go slacking, right? Remember what I tell you so that those who are to come can also remember. And again, Peter does this. He says, look, I want you to recall the words that were spoken in the past by the holy prophets, right?
Right.
I want to stir up your minds, your pure minds, by means of remembrance, right? Peter
Mhm.
himself wants us to remember these things in Second Peter. So I think this is evidenced here. It says, and remember me because I was with you without your knowing me, right?
Mhm.
Again, you knew him as a man, but you didn't know him as the Logos. It's just like it says in the Acts of John. Look, what they're looking at down there isn't really me. I mean, in the
Right.
same sense that when you see Jesus at the Transfiguration, that's like Jesus, but amplified, like his
Right.
true self. So that if all you see is just his flesh or whatever, you're not really seeing the real him.
You're just
Okay?
seeing the parabolic image of the word.
You're seeing him in accordance with your image, right?
Mhm.
And there's a higher aspect to him than just that. But he is willing to condescend to that so that you can get on board and that you can receive forgiveness, right?
Right.
Because you believed on the lower level, it's enough for me to identify you as mine. I will pass over you. Okay.
Right.
And it says, and once again, I persuade you, for I am revealed to you, building a house which is very valuable to you, since you take shelter under it. So now
Mhm.
he's investing them in this future generation. He's saying, look, I am building a house, right?
Mhm.
Again, this is consistent. I go away to build, mini mansions or whatever, and etc. Right? So I'm building you a house which is valuable to you since you take shelter under it. In other words, this third generation or whatever is going to, in a sense, reveal that you have been atoned for. And because they reveal your atonement, and again, the atonement is from Him,
Uh-huh.
okay? But we are here to show them their atonement. And that's why it's valuable to it, since they take shelter under it. In the same way, you will be able to support your neighbor's house when theirs is in danger of falling. Um, again, the fact that their contribution is going to be useful to us in the future, right? Here at a
Right.
time when Christianity and Judaism are so under attack and so thought of as, silly and stupid and antiquated and quaint, and people view it wrongly. And so Christianity is about to go out the window in our modern day and age, by and large, at least in the eyes of the world, because they're so like into evil and into technology and things like that, that they imagine Christianity to be silly and stupid. Or so, here we are, kind of a crossroads where we really need to make a stand, or else Christianity and all these other religions will kind of become a thing of the past or whatever. I mean, I think it's trending towards that. It's becoming less and less relevant. Seems like even in my own lifetime, although I kind of grew up in a rural area, where there was a lot of religious influence or whatever. I was never really a part of it, but I was surrounded by it. It seemed like there was still a little bit of that in school. There was still a little bit of that on TV, still a little bit of that on the radio and stuff. And I have watched, just in my own short life, how Christianity has become less and less relevant and less important, less and less respected, I think, by and large throughout the world, and just become less and less relevant. So even now, when Christianity or whatever is kind of fading away in the eyes of the world anyway, and not in the eyes of Christians necessarily, but just in terms of their credibility and influence and importance in the world, they become more and more marginalized. But because we are able to take their message, the Judaic scriptures and the Christian scriptures, and build on that, right, then we are then able to be supported by that, right? So again, he says, in truth I say to you, woe to those on whose behalf I was sent down to this place. Blessed are those who are to ascend to the Father. You there? Oh, sorry. Um, in truth I say to you, woe to those on whose behalf I was sent down to this place. Okay, well, again, that would be them. He says, no, notice that that I descended for you, and it was for your sake that I came to this place. And um, had it been to those who would listen to me, I would never have had to ascend. Um, so he says, blessed are those who are to ascend to the Father. Um, that would be those who would follow him, in other words, or follow him wherever he goes, so that if he happens to go um, a way that other people don't want to follow, you still follow the Lamb wherever he goes or whatever. And those are the ones who actually get to the Father. That no one gets to the Father except through him, him being the Logos, the way, the truth, the life, and etc. And he says, and again, I reprove you, those who are, make yourselves like those who are not, in order that you may come to be with those who are not. Again, those who are represents those who are in authority, those who have eminence, those who have clout, those who have standing or place in this world, right? Make yourself like those who are not. This is with reference to Jews and Christians listening to the people who are to come about and yielding to their positions, and maybe even going so far as to abandon their positions in order to allow those who are coming in order to reign, and to make themselves like those who are not, or whatever, in order that you may
Yeah.
come to be with those who are not. Well, those who are not are like the nothings and the nobodies of the world. They come
Right.
along at the end, kind of like those,
11th hour workers.
yeah, like the workers in the field, right? They're sort of the scragglers, they're the people at the ends of the street. He says, go get them, whether they're good or evil or whatever. He's saying, look, don't be like all about your power and position. Go and
He's
make
wanting us.
yourselves like those who don't crave power and position.
Right.
Make yourself
Right.
like people who don't want that kind of thing.
That
He
we're
says,
all
do
brothers and sisters here in this, and that there is no hierarchy other than our Father and Jesus over us. You
right.
know.
And he says, do not let the kingdom of heaven become desolate among you. Do not become arrogant on account of the light which illumines. In other words, the light which illumines, that higher level teaching, could lead one to become comfortable and arrogant.
I could see that, sure.
And so because they're arrogant, let's say, and they're sort of complacent, right? Then that would their complacency, let's say, and their arrogance, because of this knowledge, let's say, could lead to overconfidence, let's say, and
Mm-hmm.
allow them to be made vulnerable by those who wish to make the kingdom desolate among them. In other words, to take that mystery and remove it from them.
Right.
Okay. And he says, rather become to yourselves in this manner, as I am to you. All right. In other words, what I'm telling you is to like fall in line, to listen to me, to observe the word, and etc. Right.
Right.
And he says, now become to yourselves in this manner, as I am to you. Now I am interceding kind of on your behalf, is kind of what he's saying. I
Mm-hmm.
have placed myself under the curse in order that you may be saved. So he's saying, look, embrace death. Put yourself under the same curse. I, the Logos, am going to be taken and, um, imprisoned and beaten and accused falsely. Let's let that happen to you in your case. Follow my example, embrace my cross, and follow after me in my
Right.
manner, right? Right? In order that they might be saved. Why? Because that is how they make themselves useful to that coming generation. Because they place it down for that coming generation to find and to uncover, right? They, in a sense, save themselves because they're apparently not able to do it at that time. So, in the time to come, when people are able to look back over the works that they did and are able to overcome the devil, are able to overcome this world or whatever, it will be because those other people, the Christians and the Jews, Peter and James, have left this mystery for us, that they have laid down their knowledge in a sense for us to pick it up again at some future
Right.
time, which is the seventh day, which is now. So
Right.
that's so that they can be saved. And again, you take this message to the church, you take this message to the synagogues. If they listen, then they can be saved.
Yes.
And because they have fallen into the same death as the Logos, they have fallen into the same death as Jesus did. What Jesus did in the flesh, which he did do in the flesh, right, was as a living parable, again, as we spoke
Exactly.
of earlier. So that being said, Peter answered and said, sometimes you urge us to the kingdom of heaven, and other times you turn us away, Lord. This is the church in a sense confused. Like, which way do you want us to go with this? You tell us to follow you, right? And then you tell
Right.
us to scorn death, and then you tell us to embrace death. You know, you tell us to reign, and then you tell us to lay this down for a future generation. You
Right.
know, I'm confused, right?
Right.
So, um, he says, sometimes you persuade us and impel us to faith, right? And promise
Mhm.
us life. And other times you expel us from the kingdom of heaven, right? Like, I am leaving you and I don't want you to come with me. You know what I'm saying? Just as you don't
Mhm.
want me to stay with you, right?
Mhm.
And it says, the Lord answered and said to us, I have given you faith many times. Moreover, I have revealed myself to you, James, and you have not known me. Right? Again, so he goes back to James all the time, you know, in the sense that I've spoken to you only. I've revealed myself to you only, or to you separately, let's say. Right? It keeps underscoring the fact that the Jews were prior, and that the Jews, in a sense, did not
Were the
know him.
were the first to be revealed, but yet rejected by his own people.
Okay, but what he's saying, look, Peter's putting it off on Jesus. He's saying, look, you're telling us to follow you and telling us not to follow you. You're telling us to believe, you're telling us not to believe. You know, he's saying, well, I don't get it. And the Lord is saying,
Right.
well, I've given you faith and you've believed me, in other words, and I've
Mhm.
revealed myself to you, James, right? And you believe me, right? But you also have not known me. See,
Right.
they're the waverers, right?
Uh huh.
Again, I see you rejoicing many times. And when you are elated over the promise of life, are you nonetheless glum? And are you distressed when you were taught about the kingdom? But you have received life through faith and knowledge, right? So in other words, he's saying, look, you're happy one minute, you're glum the next minute, right? I promise you
Right.
life, I give you faith, right?
Right.
But you're not reacting properly here. And
Yeah.
moreover, right here, you're trying to put this off on me, and I'm just kind of giving it back to you. All right? That's
Right.
why. I'm telling you to do it, but I know that you can't. I'm telling you
Uh
should
huh.
do it. If you were to do it, you could pull it off, in other words. But since you're
Right.
so wishy-washy, since you're such a waverer, like you unstable waves of the sea, as James puts it in his other letter, or in the epistle of James, um, you know, you're elated over the promise of life, and you're nonetheless glum, right? In other words, you have mixed feelings about what I'm telling you.
Right. To begin with,
Okay,
and
so when I tell you, yeah, so when I'm talking to you about following me, I'm talking to that part of you. And
ah,
when I'm pushing you back, I'm talking to that other part of you. See,
that is
problem is
perfect. That
you're
is so
divided.
profound. That is so profound. I mean, you just absolutely, rightly divided this word right here because that brings such clarity.
And it
You're
says, so we're,
absolutely right.
he says, but you have received life through faith and knowledge, right?
Right.
So the implication being, why would you be glum? Why would you be divided? Why would you have
Right.
all of these questions? Why can't you just get it together, right?
Right.
Therefore, scorn rejection when you hear it. But when you hear the promise, be the more glad. In other words,
Amen.
instead of believing the rejection, instead
Mhm.
of entertaining it, see, that's the division,
Right.
right? He's
Exactly.
saying scorn that. Somebody comes along to you and says, Jesus was just a man, blah, 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 and that's all
Or
there
they
is, and
even
that's
say
it, and that's
something
that.
crazy like you're not saved, you don't do this and that and the other thing. You know, Well, who
Yeah,
are
his
they?
faith is his faith isn't 100%, and this is characteristic of Peter all over the place. He says, "Look, if if everyone else were to abandon you, right, I wouldn't do it."
Right.
And Jesus is like, "Oh, you wouldn't? I'm gonna tell you this very night you're gonna deny me 3 times,
Yeah.
right?" But
Right.
no, but I mean, this is not a different message. This is exactly what he's saying in all the Gospels,
Right.
canonical or otherwise. Peter's just very deeply divided as a
Yes.
person,
Right.
you know. And so he says, look, um, he says, therefore scorn rejection when you hear it. In other words, don't believe the lie. But when you hear
Right.
the promise, be the more glad,
Ex-
right? Understand, just
That
just
is so
just get on
beautiful.
this side of it. Just push, eliminate, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative.
I
In
mean,
truth,
doesn't that just make your heart soar? I mean, it's just so clear, and what he's trying to say there. It's
This book is so profound. I mean,
it
every
is.
time I read it, it's like I find
Yeah.
something else in it. It's just there's so
Right.
much there.
It's
It's
so
like, in truth, I say to you that no one who will receive life and believe in the kingdom, the one who will receive life and believe in the kingdom will never leave it, not even if the Father desires to banish him. All right. So now, what's he just gotten through saying to them? Is, look, I'm leaving you because I don't want to be with you any more than you want to be with me. Right? So their
Mhm.
desire, in effect, is what he's telling them, is that they're kind of uncomfortable with him there. They'd kind of rather he kind of go away and just let him be and do everything be
Mhm.
all hunky dory. Because every time he comes, he tells them stuff they don't want to hear, and he
Kind
chastises
of
them.
want it to be over. They kind of want it to be over. They don't want to hear it
Well,
anymore.
look, I mean, how many times you've been chewed out by your parents or your boss or something, and you just
Right.
start like, man, I just
You're
need to
like,
get out of
oh
here.
man, I don't. I
Yeah.
wish
Well,
they would just go
that's
away.
just the way it is, right? You
Yeah.
want, you want to get away. So
Right.
anyway, but that's kind of where they're at because
Uh-huh.
he has something against them. And again, he reproves his apostles all over the place. In Revelation, he's reproving his churches all over the place. He's saying, I
Right.
got stuff against you. All right. So
The
we have to be
truth.
very wary about this
Yeah.
because Jesus had all kinds of stuff against us.
Mhm.
And he's laying it straight too. He's saying, "Look, I'm just not gonna accede to your will. You can do this for 100 years. You can do it for 2,000 years. I'm not gonna cave.
Right.
I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, and that's it. You're either on board or you're not. But
Right.
my advice is to you is to get it together and proceed as you're supposed to instead of looking back. Because if you keep looking back, you're not fit for the kingdom."
Right.
It says, "These things I shall say to you for the present. But now I shall ascend to the place from which I have come. But you, when I was eager to go, have driven me out. And
Right.
instead of your accompanying me, you have pursued me." Right? Because they want to be free from all that. And he says,
Mhm.
"But give heed to the glory which awaits me. And having opened up your hearts," which parenthetically had to have been closed,
Right.
"listen to the hymns which await me up in heaven. For today I am obliged to take my place at the right hand of my Father. Now I have said my last word to you. I shall depart from you." Right?
Mhm.
Well, that's kind of ripping off. Like he's able to then at that point depart from them.
Mhm.
But what does he just say? He says, "Look, he says, in truth I say to you, the one who will receive life and believe in the kingdom, in other words, who will do what I tell him, will never leave it. They will not. They're not divided like that. It is,
Right. They
it is
don't
a
want to
it is
leave
an
it.
act of will." So
Mhm.
he's saying that even if the Father wishes to banish him, this guy's not going to let it happen.
Right,
This
because this
guy's
is
going
a
to
right.
hang on
Yeah.
regardless.
Right. I mean,
If you are determined, if you're determined, nothing can deter you.
right.
Not anything. Not even if the God wanted to get rid of what he's saying is, look, you Christians and you Jews, you do not have to fall from grace.
Right.
Okay? If the part of you that likes what you're hearing and understands what I'm telling you were to become fully spiritual instead of halfway towards the spirit, halfway towards the flesh, where your soul is divided against itself, and now
Right.
your soul is killing itself because it's choosing the flesh,
Mhm.
right? He's saying, look, if you were otherwise, if you were the kind of person just hang on to me, hang on to me, hang on to me, regardless of what I say, right?
Mhm.
There's not a thing in this world could stop you from coming with me.
Right.
So he's leveling with them. He's actually telling them what to do, and they still won't do it because they just don't get it, right?
Right.
I mean, it's just like the same thing. It's persistence. Like,
Like the woman with the unrighteous judge, she kept knocking on that door.
yeah, yeah. It's
Kept
that
knocking on the
persistence.
door. That persistence. You know, you don't give up.
You know, and there are times when people say something to Jesus, and he acts like he's not paying any attention to them. And because they persist, then he'll turn around and he'll say, "You really have great faith," right?
Right. Well,
So
like
he's
the
saying,
woman that wanted that was telling him that even the dogs get to eat from under the table.
yeah, and he says, "You know
No.
what? Because you answered it like that,
Yep,
you
I'm
know,
gonna
you
give
get
it
what
to
you
you.
get what you asked for,
Yes,
right?
because
Because
she was insistent
she
that.
insisted.
Right.
So
Right.
he's saying, look, this promise is so binding that I'm telling you that somebody who really wants this will never give it up no matter what, and there's not a thing in heaven or earth that's going to stop them,
Right.
right? You know, God desires to banish you guys. The Father wishes you guys, in a sense, not to be abandoned, but to be sort of marginalized and
Mhm.
left until the end, right? He's saying, but a true believer is not going to let that happen under any circumstances,
Nope.
right?
That's right.
And it's not possible to fool the elect, right? It says, "These things I shall say to you for the present, but now I shall ascend to the place from which I have come." Again, the Spirit. He's going to
Right.
that same spiritual level from which he came,
Right.
right? He went from Christ to Jesus. You know what I'm saying? He's about to go from Jesus to Christ, that higher level meaning. He said, but
Exactly.
when I was eager to go, you have driven me out, and instead of accompanying me, you have pursued me. Again, the church
Like you
destroyed this
persecuted.
meaning. The church and the Jews destroyed this teaching.
Mhm. Mhm.
They pursued the logos
Yes, they
because the logos made them face certain truths that they were uncomfortable facing. And because they were divided, because they were looking at the flesh
did.
by
Mhm.
means of their soulish reasoning, which was
Right.
fixated on the flesh, they abandoned him and they
Mhm.
did not follow him wherever he went, right?
Right.
And so they pushed him out. So that's who he's addressing in this, is that those Christians who did that, those Jews who
He's
did that.
saying the meaning of my word is going ascending to a higher spiritual meaning, and you need to understand it. You need to follow that, and instead of that happening, they didn't want it to be a spiritual level at all. They wanted to keep it the physical. They wanted to root out any kind of teachings or understandings that would allow people to reach that and hide them, burn them, bury them, whatever.
Right.
Um, I
So
get it. I get it.
so anyway, he goes, so now I have said my last word to you. I shall depart from you. That meaning the higher level meaning, the spiritual meaning. For a
Right.
chariot of wind has taken me up. Again, what is the wind? The wind is doctrine, right? So he's being taken up by this teaching, if you will, um, up to the heavens or to the heavenly level, right?
Uh huh. Uh huh.
And from now on, I shall strip myself, essentially of the Spirit, in order that I may clothe myself. In other words, what you're going to see is Jesus the man, not Jesus the logos. What you're going to see is
Right.
just winds and not doctrines and etc. So you're going to see all of this stuff kind of naked and without the
Mhm.
clothing of the Spirit, right? But
Right.
I'm going to present myself in the natural, in other words. Putting it lightly, so that I may clothe myself in the Spirit.
Mhm.
It says, but give heed. Blessed are those who have preached the Son before he descended, so that when I have come, I may ascend. Now,
Right.
what I want to say is that this means that when okay, it depends on when you pin this. I'm not sure about the dating here. If you're talking about those who like John the Baptist and these people who are awaiting the kingdom, if he means before his physical descent, um,
I
then you're talking about the
I
people who
think
paved the way for him coming in the first place,
I think it means those who preach, even in the Old Testament, about the Son before he came in the flesh, or before his the meaning of the word was put into purely physical terms. Because
Right.
the descent to me says physical terms. So that when I have come, he came in physical terms as a living parable. I may ascend, which means that the word is returning to its heavenly meaning, its spiritual meaning.
Well, that makes sense. And he says, thrice blessed are those who were proclaimed by the Son before they came into being, in order that you may have a portion with them. Okay, so this is clearly with the elect. This part is pretty unambiguous. When he says thrice blessed, it's like this. There was, in a sense, the blessing of the first revelation, that which is given to Moses and the Old Testament prophets, that
Right.
spoke of the coming Messiah. And John comes along to explain that to the people as the voice crying out in the wilderness, say, of this age, that secret language divulged. That would be the blessing of Judaism, right?
Right.
And the um, the um, the second blessing would, of course, be that of the second revelation, or true Christianity, right? As it was proclaimed to the true disciples of Christ, those who were initiates to the true meaning. Okay, so that would be twice blessed. Now the elect have not yet come into being, or we are, perhaps you might say, we are emerging into being at the moment, right? And we are thrice blessed because we have the true Judaism, the true Christianity, and then this third blessing, or this third pillar, or this third testament, the jar of the manna, or whatever, that we get the second and the first. But instead of having the law written on tables of stone, it's written on our hearts. Instead of seeing the barren rod, which is the canon, we see the rod having borne its fruit. You see what I'm saying? And so we receive that third blessing, right?
Right.
So the Jews and the Christians, James and Peter, right, that you, James and Peter, the Jews and the Christians, may have a portion with them, who are the elect, who are to come.
Right.
And then it says, when he said these things, he went away. Right? So in other words, that was his last message to him. He says, look, now I have said my last word to you. I'm going to depart from you. Right? And the last thing he says is that thrice blessed are those who were proclaimed by the Son before they came into being, in order that you may have a portion with them. And it says, when he said these things, he went away, and we knelt down, I and Peter, and gave thanks, and sent our hearts up to heaven. So they had resolved themselves then to, and kind of repented, and had seen that by means of this third generation, who will receive this third blessing, and with it the second and third, or the first and the second, I mean, and that they are now resigned to their fate, that they're going to write of a third people, which again is evidence throughout the New Testament that there is this third generation. Even Jesus said there are sheep that I have that are not of this fold, and I must go and get them, right? So it says, well, we heard with our ears, spiritually heard with our spiritual ears, and spiritually saw with our spiritual eyes, the sound of wars and a trumpet call and a great commotion, right? Well, again, I send not peace, but a sword. The trumpet call is the time of the seventh trumpet. And the great commotion is that whole transition between this age and the next.
Right.
And so it says, so they're looking really towards the future, because what they're seeing is future events, wars, the trumpet call, a great commotion. You know what I'm saying? So what they're looking into the future when they're sending their minds up further. Because look, when they see things on the spiritual level, all of a sudden the future's opened up to them. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And so when we pass beyond that place, we send our minds up further. In other words, we're seeing now even beyond that. And it says, and we saw with our eyes, our spiritual eyes, and heard with our spiritual ears, in other words, hymns and angelic praises and angelic jubilation, and heavenly majesties were hymning, and we ourselves were jubilant. So I think that's when the kingdom then has come upon the earth, and that's even further down the line.
Right.
So there is a great commotion coming up. There is this whole transition where those who are like in positions of power have to become like those who are not, right, and etc. So that's the great commotion, and all that happens right at the trumpet call, or the seventh trump, which is right at the seventh
Well,
millennium.
and it, I've heard the thing about the seventh trump before, but that is an angelic trump. I believe that there's a trump that is the trump of God, that is not angelic. It is actually the trump of God. But that's, another thing for.
Well, it corresponds with the third woe, and what is the third woe? Behold, I come quickly, right?
Right.
The third woe cometh quickly. You
Right.
see, the woe is to the world at the time of the coming of Christ. Um,
Right.
and when we pass beyond that place, we set our minds up further, and we saw their eyes, hymns, and whatever. That is now the world at peace, and this is God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven.
Right.
And we
Right.
ourselves were jubilant because they themselves were in effect there, or they themselves witness it. I mean, and it's not really a big deal because we know that prophets, when they're truly prophets, can see across time.
Right.
And well, Moses, for example, and Elijah are at the transfiguration. How did they get transported from their age and their day to Jesus's age and day? Right?
Right.
They're able to see across time and
Mhm.
exist across time. So that's, I think, what these guys are seeing as the future. And it says, and after
Right.
this, we also desire to send our spirits up to the majesty above. Um, and when we ascended, we were permitted to neither see nor hear anything. Um, Now, when they're talking about themselves, again, this is Judaism and Christianity, right?
Right.
And they are not allowed to see this,
Uh-huh.
right? And they are not allowed to hear these things, at least until that time, right?
Right.
So certain things are denied the church, and certain things are denied the Jews because they are for a future generation. And the
Right.
rest of the disciples called to us and questioned us, what is it that you have heard from the Master, and where has he gone? And we answered them, he has ascended. All right. So in other words, he has gone to that higher level. In
Right.
other words, leaving us here in the lower, in a sense,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
he has given us a pledge, and promised us all life. So in other words, the Jews, the Christians, and all the disciples, all the followers of Christ or whatever, are to be saved,
Right.
right? So that's a pretty nice promise because he's given us that much grace, right? And he has disclosed to us children, again, the elect, who are to come after us, since he has bidden us to love them inasmuch as we will be saved for their sake, right? So, in other
Right.
words, we are now to focus our attention on laying down this message for their sakes. We are embracing death in the same way that Jesus, the Logos, embraced his death, right?
Mhm.
We are going to go ahead and die spiritually so that they can live in our stead.
Mhm.
And that through their rediscovery of this message, right, then our true message can then be understood properly. And so our fate is bound up with theirs. And that's why you see as a key feature in all of these scriptures the coming of this third generation, the coming of the elect,
Right.
why it's always spoken of, right? Because their fate is bound with ours and our fate is bound with theirs. That's the way the whole thing has been laid out and arranged. So, in other words, when they go back to their friends or whatever, and they remember they're still writing this stuff down, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So what they're then doing is now all of the things that they're remembering of Jesus and his life, they're now doing with the focus of laying it down for those of us to pick up in the future.
Mhm.
So he's affected, I believe, the way that they're writing because of his timing. They're writing, Jesus shows up, gives them a message, sends them back to the people with this message, right?
Right.
And that's the whole
So that
moral of
they
the
can
story.
convey it in the writing. Right.
So, yeah, so that they can convey it in their writings. And it says, okay, so now, yeah, then, yeah, okay, and yeah, okay, inasmuch as we will be saved for their sake. And it says, and when they heard, they believed the revelation, but We're angry about those who would be born, right?
Right.
So again, they're showing the same kind of signs and reluctance and everything as James and Peter did,
Mm.
right? So all of these other denominations that existed at the time that weren't inside the official Judaism and weren't inside the official, Christianity or whatever, the so-called, all the other people who
Mhm.
believed differently from, say, the Catholic or the Orthodox or whatever church that was emerging at the time, right? That they didn't like the idea that there was that they were laying it down for a future generation either, right?
Right.
So it says, so they believe the revelation, but were angry about those who would be born. Um, so they didn't want to leave it to them; they wanted it for themselves, right? And
Mhm.
so then I, James, in other words, not desiring to entice them to scandal, sent each one to another place. But I myself went up to Jerusalem, praying that I might obtain a portion with the beloved who are to be revealed.
Wow.
Right. So,
He was
in other
he
words,
was totally accepting. He was trying to diffuse the situation. It looks like a
well,
little
he's
bit.
explaining to whoever this letter is written to,
Uh huh.
he's explaining to them, look, I'm taking a back seat. All right. I'm leaving this in your hands, is what
Uh
he's
huh.
saying.
Uh huh.
Okay? Praying that I might obtain a portion with the beloved who are to be revealed. That is the elect who are to come.
Right.
And he's saying, look, the Jews and their fate, the Christians and their fate are tied in with we who are to be revealed.
Right.
And so it says, and so that explains why he goes on. And I pray that the beginning may come from you. For
Mhm.
thus I can be saved. Because remember, Jesus earlier had said that you shall be saved for their sakes, right?
Right.
You guys dropped the ball, but if they don't, you guys are good because they're going to come back. They're going to come
They're
back
gonna
for
fix
you.
it.
Well, they're
Mhm.
not going to leave you hanging like you know what I'm saying? Don't leave them
Right.
hanging, right?
Right.
Okay, it says because they will be enlightened through me, right? Which
Mhm.
I think this letter is actually pretty enlightening.
Yes, I think so.
In terms of exposing what happened in early Judaism and Christianity and just why it is that the New Testament and everything else is infused with this message.
Right.
This is all about why that message is left for us to find. So now that maybe we've found it, began to uncover it, right? We begin to see why it is that we are important. They can't be saved without us. And it says, okay, so that's kind of the long and the short of it. For thus I can be saved, because they will be enlightened through me. So I enlighten them through the way I write, and
Right.
they turn around and they save the Jews and the Christians,
Mhm.
right? It says, through my faith and through another's, which is better than mine, right?
Mhm.
For I desire that mine become the lesser, the James the lesser. But
Huh.
anyway, um, because why? Um, Well, because their faith wasn't able to pull it off. But when
Right.
we when we have the whole world, we can bend the ear of the whole world. When anything you say can be translated into any other language instantaneously,
Right.
right? Then we have a more realistic opportunity to bring this message to the world than they had.
Right.
And so and ours is better than theirs because they had the benefit of foresight. They could see the coming commotion. They could see
Mhm.
the children coming. They witnessed this happening. They saw us doing this.
Mhm.
When they saw that commotion, what were they seeing? They were seeing us.
Mm.
You see what I'm saying? So he saw it with his own eyes. And all those people, that must have been what he said to those people. Look, we saw the future. Okay?
Right.
We are here to tell you that this does happen.
Right.
Okay? But in order to make this happen, we are going to have to set them up. It's like when
Right.
you're playing pool, right? It's not just about getting the ball in the pocket. You want to make sure that cue ball goes to the right place so you can hit the eight ball in. All right?
Right.
And we are right behind the eight ball here. Okay? So we got to make it happen. He has foreseen it, is what he's saying. And the very fact that we can see it too means that he did his job. So
Right.
now it is incumbent upon us to return the favor and to make this happen in front of the whole world. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? So that's why this letter is important, right? He says, endeavor earnestly, therefore, to make yourself like them, and pray that you may obtain a portion with them. In other words, don't waver like we did, okay? Don't sit on both sides of the fence or whatever.
Right.
Make yourself like them. For apart from what I have recounted, the Savior did not disclose revelation to us. For their sake, we proclaim, indeed, a portion with those for whom it was proclaimed, those whom the Lord has made his children.
Right.
So it's through the understanding of this that we become the children. It's through the understanding of this that we become the elect. So this book, now that we've gone through it all, and I know it's taken a long time, but you can see the importance of this book. This book chronicles for us the past and the future. It explains so much about the church, and it also gives us the means of, because we are able to interpret it, we can bring this to the church and articulate it before them.
Right.
And it remains to be seen just how quickly they will accept this. I don't imagine it's going to happen right away. But when Peter is confronted right at the second cock's crow, right, he says, you were with him, right? And you're one of these people, right? Church is like, I'm not one of them.
I don't know him. I don't
right?
know.
So, in other words, but then the cock crows or whatever, and then he is confronted by Jesus. Jesus looks just dead at him. Right? And that freaks him out. Well, I mean, you think about it. What does that mean? He recognized what he did.
Right.
This book is about showing them what they did. Remember, the lady came up to him and was like, your accent gives you away.
Right.
The accent is what is written and contained in their books that they speak. If I go to any of the canonical books, right, and I'm able to expound the same kinds of things in these canonical books as I'm able to expound in these hidden books, right? That is Peter's accent. You see what I'm saying? He speaks like the Galilean, right?
Right.
A great light has come forth, right? In Galilee of the Gentiles, if you will. You know, it's all very symbolic. You know, but this letter is just endlessly fascinating. You know, it seems a bit confusing, it seems a bit convoluted, but when you're looking at it just the right way, it makes all the sense in the world.
It does.
And you know, so again, I gotta chalk it up. I mean, the Gospel of Thomas, just like this. You know, it's discernible. It's easy to understand when you get the template for it. So all of these books are becoming less and less mysterious. And we're able to articulate them more and more and more. This is, again, what I mentioned before in the book of Enoch, where it says, look, you know, I know this mystery, that books will be given to the people. The scriptures will be given to the people. And to them will be given the scriptures. And they will understand them. And they will accept them. Right? And then it gives you a command. It says to reveal it to them with your wisdom.
Yes.
Okay? Yes. So, but we're now living in that point.
I know.
If it is able to be revealed, and what is the message? That books will be given to us.
Right.
And that's what's happening. If the books are being given to us, the angels are coming down to us and whispering in our ears or whatever. I don't understand the mechanism. Okay? All I know is that we're in that time. That day is dawning. And with the dawning of that day comes the morning star, Jesus, in our hearts.
Yes.
The Logos in our hearts.
Yes.
I mean, it's a movement. When Jesus came the first time, were there not people anticipating the kingdom?
There were.
And was not John the Baptist spirit-filled from his mother's womb?
Yes.
So there was something going on in people.
Right.
What I'm saying is that same something is going on now.
It is, yes.
And we are there like John the Baptist to say, look, there's somebody coming after us.
We're a couple of voices crying out in the wilderness.
Well, we're trying to make the way straight now, aren't we? We're trying to level the smooth. We're trying to make the high places, those who are in power, in other words, like the
Uh,
low places. And the low
right.
people, the low places, we're
Bring
trying to
them up.
raise them up.
Right.
Okay?
That
So we're
we're
trying
all
to
on the
raise
same
up the
field here.
downtrodden, and hopefully the people in power or whatever have enough humility and frankly enough sense to see the writing on the wall here,
Right.
and understand just what that means, because God's not playing around. When he's moving, he's moving. And we've seen from history what happens to people who are on the wrong side of that.
Mhm.
It doesn't end well for them, you
No.
know.
Says you will
And
consider the place of the wicked, and they will not be. I mean, that's in the Old Testament. You know,
well,
it's
God doesn't need the wicked. He uses them,
he does. He
but
does.
he doesn't. They're
I'm just
once they've
saying.
outlived their usefulness, what's going to happen? Look, even
Well,
even
they
Satan, the
despise one
accuser.
another. Mhm.
Well, even the accuser, what did it say? There was not any place left for him,
Right.
right? So, in other words, they've exhausted everything at this point, and so all that remains is the actual overcoming of them, and that is why I believe we are here to
Mhm.
actually lead the world into the spiritual revolution that has been left for us to find. And this book explains that in so much detail
It
that it's
does.
almost shocking. You
Well,
know,
it is very emotionally profound. I mean, I found myself, with tears welling up in my eyes several different times as I read it, and I just, I've had books affect me that way, but this was exceptionally powerful that way. And I'm not a real emotional person. I mean, I don't think so. I don't think that I'm a real emotional person. I don't cry at the drop of a hat, in other words. It takes something pretty powerful to pull tears out, you know?
well, it's funny. It's funny because I've had my ordeals and my own struggles in life. The thing that we're reading out of here, I find myself kind of laughing at it because I wrote this back in 1997. All that you see here in blue is stuff
Oh,
that I,
the interpretation notes in
yeah,
blue?
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So I knew all this stuff a long time ago. It's part of my guidebook for the elect series. That was the
Right.
follow up to the
Wow.
Peter principle, or as I renamed it, the key to Christianity on my channel. But that's all under the guidebook for the elect. I've known this stuff for, man, how long ago is that? Like 15 years ago.
Oh, it's long.
And I knew stuff before that. You know what I'm saying? But it doesn't matter.
Right.
You can go around telling people stuff like this till you're blue in the face.
And they'll
And
roll
that's
their
and they
eyes at
just
you.
don't see it. They just don't hear it. And it doesn't even matter what you do. It's as if you couldn't slap them, and have them even hear you. It's like
Or
it's just
shake
as
them,
if,
like, listen.
well, in a way, it's like they are drunk.
Uh-huh.
You ever seen somebody who's
Oh,
passed
they're
out? Can you even
numb.
do anything? No, because they're just completely gone, right?
Right.
And that's how people are spiritually. You just
Right.
cannot slap any sense into these people, And I'm sorry. I mean, that's just the truth. I mean, that's been my life experience. And it doesn't matter how well you articulate it. It's like a lot of things. It goes so far and then it fizzles. That's why I have
Right.
to make thousands of videos because I've always got to be giving people a new example. Well, how
Something
about
new.
this? Well, how about that? Well, how about this? And it always
Hey, does this
dies.
help? Right.
Well, you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying, I'm still doing
Well,
my
you're
nine
doing
to
what you're
five. You know
supposed
what
to
I'm saying?
do.
I'm still going around and nobody thinks anything of me who knows me. You know what I'm saying? So I struggle with it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Nobody I know gives me any credit for knowing anything because I struggle. That's the thing. You have to struggle. And this could take 10 days or it could take 20 years.
Right.
It just depends on what moves in the heavens and what God's timetable is. The
Yes.
only thing I can
Mhm.
do is persist. The only
Right.
thing I can do is just keep on trying. I think
Right.
people want to help, but they maybe don't know what to do or how to help. You know, I think to be on it and to be articulate, but to understand from beginning to end and to pursue it and to
Mhm.
stick with it. It's never going to work if it's just this plus this other thing that you believe over here. It's
Right.
never going to work unless you're really on board with it.
Unless you're
Because,
fully invested.
because well, what I'm telling you is what I'm telling you today. If you just listen to it today and you walk away 2, 3 days from now, trust me, you're going to forget most of it.
Well,
You know what I'm saying?
exactly.
And you get involved in, pursuing pleasures and things, watching TV or whatever it is you
Or
do, and you just
workaholic or
mindlessly,
something.
whatever kind of holic, whatever. You know, problem is it pulls you away. It's in a
Right. The
sense
world
like the
will.
soul that killing itself.
Mhm.
All right. Worldliness it causes you to forget. It causes you to lose perspective,
Mhm.
right? That's why you got to be all in. Because if you
Right.
don't, even if you're Peter, even if you're James, you can lose it, right?
Right.
Don't be overconfident. This book warns you against all of this stuff.
It
So you
does.
really got to take it all to heart because this is important, right? And
Right.
you have to regard it as important and you have to treat it as if it were important.
Yes.
Because if you don't, you will lose it and it'll be lost on you. That's the power that the devil has over people don't quite who don't quite who waver, I guess, or who don't quite
Mhm.
commit themselves 100% to something.
Right.
It becomes it just becomes a grind.
Mhm. Mhm.
So anyway, no, I don't want to beat this to death. I think we just kind of leave it at that.
We
I think the
covered it
book is
pretty well.
I think
Or
this
you
book is
did.
just absolutely amazing.
It
Like
is.
I said, it's just endlessly amazing. I could talk about it for days and days and days, but I'm sure the people get tired of it.
Well, in closing, thank you, Brother Robert, for sharing your insights with us all. This is, like you said, a really awesome book and a very powerful book, and I recommend everyone take the time to read it, study it, flesh it out. See if it means the same thing to you. If it doesn't, if there's some more insight in here that we've missed, by all means, put it in the comment section. Share it with everyone.
Yeah,
It's it.
participate. Do
Yes.
something. Be part
Do
of a
something.
conversation. Be part of
Yes.
making
Yes.
this happen because that's the thing. It's gotta get legs of its own. It's got to get a life of its own if it's ever gonna mean anything. If it means something to you, if it resonates with you, you gotta know that you're seeing it, that it's got the ring of truth to it. There's something to it. It means that that's what God intended it to be. If
Right.
you really, really get it and you really, really see it, then what you see is as something that God has given to us. If
Right.
you really, really get it, you understand that this is a gift.
It is
Okay?
a gift.
And so treat it like a gift. Treat it like a revelation. Because, I'm reluctant to use that word because just I'm
Well,
fallible as anybody else, and I don't like to make claims that I can't back up. But at the same time, it is what it is. It is an antidote to the situation that we are in, and that is miraculous. And
yes.
to see it really is nothing short of a revelation. And if you see it, it's a revelation to you. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
It's
And
something.
pay it forward. Don't keep it to yourself. Don't hide it under a bushel. Pay it forward. Send it out to your friends, your family. Let
That
other
that goes with
people
anything.
get on
If
it.
you believe
Right.
in it, get behind it. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? If you're on board, get fully on board. Don't wait,
Right. Yeah,
right?
don't just hang to the side of the boat. You might be swept
This
away. You
if
know?
early Christians had held on to this mystery, think
Mhm.
of all the wars, the
Oh, that
horrible
wouldn't
things
have
that have
had to
happened for
happen.
2,000 years. Everybody
Right.
likes to blame the Christians. No, you really should blame the church.
Right.
And that's a pretty tough pill to swallow, but this is why. Because they had this knowledge then. They had this message then, and they let it slip away. We cannot
Right.
be guilty of the same thing.
No.
Because what greater condemnation will we incur for being like them when we know better? We're going to
Right.
be the same as Judas if we let this die. And
Right.
that's what's really bad about this. So, this is stuff that's been held back because for people to turn their back on this knowledge would be a crime against God.
It
And
no doubt
so
about
he
it.
spared us that. right? But
Right.
if you do know it and you still turn your back against it, then I can't say the same thing. You're doing this in full light of truth at that point,
Right.
and that's
That's
a whole
between
other
us
ball
and
game.
our maker, and our maker, and gosh, I don't want to be there to see that. But
Yeah.
anyway, this is the Resurrected Word radio show where we, tackle some of the books and a lot of the books that nobody else is going to touch or even talk about. Here we believe that we live on all of God's Word, and therefore we proclaim it to all who will listen. God bless you all, and thank you for watching, listening, commenting, and for sharing of this video. And Robert, thank you so much for sharing everything that
Well,
you did
thank you too,
today.
sister. Thank you for the opportunity to give the presentation.
Okay. And with that, we will close.